Welcome to Learning cEDH, the podcast dedicated to teaching you everything you need to know about competitive Commander. I am your host, Matthew, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Eric. And today, we're talking about cEDH in general, really. We're not doing as much of a dedicated dive into like a really specific topic or diving too much into some analytics. We're going to be looking at it a little bit. But we really wanted to talk about, we're about 3 months post-ban. And we wanted to talk about where the metagame is at. We want to talk about some statistics that we're getting to see now that we're starting to have some that are a bit, I would say in the realm of actually being relevant enough. We're not just looking at one event. And then talking about really more of an unfiltered, unedited perspective on what we think about the game right now. Whether we're enjoying it, what we're liking about it, how much we're playing, and just the general vibe of what's happening kind of going into the new year of cEDH and of Magic.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited just to kind of get back on here. It's been a while since Matt and I have recorded. We've had various things happen along with, Matt was getting hurricaned out for a while and he's been working on some other projects. And then for me personally, like I've just been doing more like life stuff. So cEDH has kind of taken a very, very, very back seat to just the importance of like, my day-to-day functions, what I enjoy, that type of stuff and whatnot. I've been doing some just different gaming stuff, playing 60 card formats. So
yeah, I've been really big into Cube, especially lately, and like interested in Legacy. Started actually playing some. Got some friends to like put some Legacy decks together and been playing that. Playing Mystic Forge before they banned something out of it, so that the Force of Will players will stop crying. But we're in a really interesting spot where almost every format, I think, other than Standard, is just getting extreme outcry for some kind of change. Where it's just, and Vintage actually, I think Vintage is actually in a really good spot too, from what I've seen in Eternal Weekend. As long as you like Laris, you're good. But almost every format, like Legacy, this is the most extreme, I think. We talked about this before we went on air, where for such a stable meta that has had people who tend to not be very overreactive when something they don't like is popping up, people are just like, nope. There was one tournament, Mystic Forge is out of control, ban Vexing Bauble, ban Frog, ban Entomb, ban Reanimate, and just like, and to some degree, I get it, and a lot of formats aren't in a great space right now. Modern seems to just be the one ring the format, right? And it is looking really, really bad over there. A lot of people are expecting that to get hit. Not so much, calls for bans in Commander or cEDH right now. By some people there are, but a lot of people want things taken off the ban list. We'll talk about what people are thinking with the format, but I think in general there's kind of a since the bans and like the announcements of like 6 standard sets and Universes Beyond going into standard and stuff like that, there's been kind of a general discontent in the Magic community.
Yeah, to piggyback off your point, I have the Grixis Tinker deck built in Vintage.
Nice.
That's what I've been playing. I do not own Power.
I was gonna say, dang, dude, I didn't know you had it like that.
I have everything else but Power.
Yeah. Hey, Mana Crypts are cheap now. That that's gave everybody a little bit of a leg up.
Luckily, I own several Mana Crypts and always have.
Oh, very lucky.
That Japanese foil Mana Crypt can actually do something. But that deck's been a blast because that deck is like, I don't want to say it's Rogsai, but it's pretty much Rogsai, and you get to tinker into Bolas and Citadel, which is really, really awesome. I feel like a dirty player playing Force of Will, but that's the breaks.
Oh, that's the default over there.
It is, and that's just something I've just enjoyed, like doing different things, and also too the time of the year for I don't know, everyone's different seasons, especially different parts of the world, but at least for me and like my play group and just my friends, we're all married. Like we're all married. They all have kids. My wife's pregnant. By the way, I don't think I've got to share that my wife, we're having a beautiful boy. I'm excited. I'm going to be a dad. He is going to literally get granted an awesome Magic collection at some point, probably. But we're super excited. So that's like a good thing that I haven't been able to really share. And typically, like Matt and I kind of discuss a little bit like what's going on with us. personally, and that's been, very, very exciting for me. And that's really where my a lot of my attention's been focused on. For me personally, I've just been focused on learning as much as I can about the pregnancy process, outside of just like what my wife's going through, but the process of what it's like when we're in the hospital. So I
Mhm.
think typically people they might hire what's called like a doula. I
Yeah.
think that's what that's called. Basically, I'm going through a process right now through from a medical practitioner of basically being a doula for my wife. Just we want to make sure that we only do what's necessary for the pregnancy. We're going to try to have a natural birth. And I don't want to bore the audience with that.
Mhm.
So that's where a lot of my like learning curve and what I've been trying to like really focus on is that. And then also too, I've been looking to buy land, looking for to where we're going to try to build a barn dominium, or people just call them barn doors, on some land, and just kind of get away from, like, we're in kind of between the country and the town a little bit, but we want to move about within an hour from where we live now, so that way we're so close to grandparents and that type of stuff. But we're really looking to just like kind of move a little off grid and just kind of like get back to my roots of regenerative agriculture, that type of stuff. So that's like where my focus has been. So cEDH has, like, as disinterested as I've been in it because of various things, the bands, but not just that, but I'll be honest, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, but I just haven't really enjoyed engaging as much with it, because my interest in the format is diminished, and I'd say because I've got more, to me, important things that I need to put my time and my energy into, just like everybody else does. And it's the time of the year, right? Like, it's always something every weekend, whether it's a holiday party, a Christmas thing, whether it was Thanksgiving or Halloween, whatever. There's always something going on this time of the year. So it's really hard for me to carve like time out to dedicate and make for like a tournament run or something like that. So that's going to be on the back burner for a while. So that's kind of like what's been going on with me personally.
Hold on 1 second. Ah. Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, I also been buying some land. Got me a little.
Whoa,
Got me like
that,
ice
that's
cradle.
that's definitely as we like to say in the South, that looks like a holler right there.
Oh yeah, got me one of the. I got my Thai guy. Still need my Volk Island, but I'm almost fully done up in Rog Thras. Other than like random cards I've been testing, I just haven't picked up. Oh, also Candelabra. I'm almost never buying one of those. But other random stuff I've been testing, like I need to get a Japanese steel enchantment. Uh, there's some cards that, because I know I did. I don't know if I talked about this on a video, but I did a going into the boil. I did a coaching session with Sam Black. Wait, which ended up just being us talking about Rogthras on stream for 2 hours.
I watched
Uh,
that, by the way. So
it was a lot of fun. It was really cool.
it was really enjoyable.
It was cool just for a little, like, made me feel like a better player. Just Sam like being interested in my opinions. To be honest, because Sam, sometimes you meet Sam and he's just like, all right, yeah, what do you know? Who are you? What's the deal? And then, he's kind of an interesting character. But just talking about that, and now since then he's gone like a super different direction. Like we talked a little bit about some of the otter focus builds, and I'm testing kind of a variant on of his, doing weird cards like Song of Toad and Tans, and testing Kitsa and Dramatic Reversal. Dramatic Reversal, I have not cast Kitsa. I don't think. Maybe one time. Dramatic Reversal has been insane. When you get to untap all your dorks like with Enduring Vitality and untap your candle, untap all that stuff, like you got the relic going. That's been nuts. That's been a banger. But
Yeah, that card was really popular when Bryant Cook was iterating on Rogside for a
yeah,
while. And because that deck was, obviously it's like a triple talisman deck plus all the other rocks and everything in it. It was basically just blue dark ritual plus. Like
yeah,
it was just really, really good. It was effectively like the fourth Final Fortune effect,
yeah.
like, and obviously being in your deck, being teamer and having access to dorks, that's also pretty insane too.
Yeah, it was. I played it on. I played on Back on the Stack. I recorded some gameplay. I don't think that's up yet, but maybe by the time y'all see this, it'll be out soon. Where I got to cast it. It was like turn 2 or turn 3, and I had. I think I made all my. I had a Relic of Legends, so that made like 3-4 mana. It's on its own. I untapped my Candle, which I had a Cradle and Manamo in play. So that made like maybe 8 mana just from that on it. Like, and I've seen people start to play it more in Kinnan as just a giant ritual or like 2 mana activate Kinnan basically. Starting to see it more. Just a pretty good card. Whether it's actually any good with Kitsa, I can't get Kitsa to work. The Flood Caller stuff, I've got that to happen. Kitsa having to be summoned, being summoning sick to do anything, like, I don't know. I'm not as sold
For
on the
our
Kitsa.
so for our listeners slash viewers, what is a Kitsa?
It has a lot of text because it's like 1 in a blue, Otter Wizard, 1/3 Vigilance. I think I think it's the
Blue
start.
creature with vigilance checks out.
Vigilance and Prowess. Um, and then it has tap, draw a card, discard a card, and then you can spend 2 tap to copy target instant or sorcery. I don't think you have to control it. Maybe you do, but I know it lets you do 2 tap counter copy target instant or sorcery, activate only if Kitsa's power is 3 or greater. So you can, if you cast a couple spells with Kitsa, you can go infinite with dramatic reversal if because you'll get to make the copy, untap. It's like really similar to like a Stella Lee loop or something like that, where you'll just start copying over and over if you're netting mana. You can also,
And because the deck is otter focused, and obviously also all the other creatures that go along with what otters, rats, and frogs, right?
yes,
So you get all these creature types. So you just naturally are playing these cards. So the dramatic reversal and this Kitsa, whether you've got to do it or not, are just kind of harmonious together. So
yeah,
that's pretty awesome.
because you even get to like you'll tap the Kitsa to loot, and then you cast a spell if you have Flood Caller in play, trigger, untap Kitsa, and like there's kind of lots of overlap with that, and it all works together well with Relic of Legends and Earthcraft and all that stuff too, where you can just make tons of mana. You can do absolutely outrageous amounts of mana with like Song of Totentans, making a bunch of rats, and then your Enduring Vitality, making them all dorks, and just you start to just manual Storm and Thrasios. Just activate Thrasios, reveal a Lotus Petal, cast it, make like 10 mana.
I
Activate
believe
Thrasios
the
again.
kids like I believe the kids like to call that layered, you know.
Yes,
So
very layered. And trying to figure out the amount of synergy. I also got my boys are altered up now. Not that you can really see it all that well on this, but
ooh.
I got them and Silas. They all make a little panorama together. There's so much glare. But I'll post pictures of this somewhere. But they're super sick. But so I've been playing a good bit recently, especially I've been started recording some gameplay for another project I've been doing. And then just I still try to play once a week at my store. For the most part, but it's kind of an uphill battle. Cause don't really like cEDH that much at the moment. In sort of like, I mean, if you guys watch this, you kind of know the decks that we play. Like Eric is known for Corvold. I play Rog Thras, played Rog Sai. I think you guys know obviously Corvold got hit pretty hard, but I think arguably Rog Thras got better. I think Rog Sai got worse a little bit. I think it got worse than we expected, mainly because of what people are playing. But it isn't really anything to do with what's good for me. I know a lot of people don't put themselves in those shoes, but I don't really think of myself as a player first. I try to think more from like the health of the game perspective and more as a designer, I guess you like when I'm thinking about the game, I care more about what it actually looks like from a bird's eye view and not what I'm getting to do in my games. And I think it looks pretty bad. We're gonna kind of talk about. I think a lot of what spurred this on was Datatog's recent post of the statistics of each position in seed order, like first through fourth, and their win rate, as well as the draw rate of games. And the kind of the main finding being that first seat is a good bit better, but mainly fourth seat has just really taken a dive in terms of its ability to actually win a game of cEDH. The win rate of fourth has gone down a lot, and like 25% of games end in draws, which is up from like 18-ish, I want to say, 17, something like that. It's like a 6% increase. And this is looking at the period where the two biggest events ever happened with the Boyle 2 and the European Championship, like 2 giant events, as well as lots of different gold events, different smaller events like that are still pretty regular, and like a good amount of data that we've got post bans and like the 3 months that that's happened. And it really looks like the game is slower than ever, of course. Really, really about your seed order and the cards that the game is about, which we've we've talked a lot about Ristic Study, Mystic Remora, Esper, and these effects, and just generally how they bog down a game and aren't very fun or enjoyable to play around and make really bad play patterns and encourage really kind of bad play. Um, and the game is just so about those now that there isn't a lot of tools available to push forward in a game and just develop into wins. And it's more about drawing cards, resolving a flash enabler, winning on top of people, resolving a silence effect, but just really just it feels like cEDH games are who gets their engine down first. Obviously, the person earlier in seed order can do that on average before everyone else, and just getting the most cards. And at the end of the game, just being like, okay, who has the most cards? Put all the cards out on the table. The one with the most person with the most wins. I really, really don't like it. Even when it's me. I recorded for like 7 hours yesterday. I played cEDH. I had a bunch of early Ristic studies, and it didn't feel like I was just like really outmaneuvering everybody. It was just like, well, I had to turn 2 Ristic on the play. Sucks to be you guys, I guess. Like, I just now I'm drawing into more mana. I think the game is way more high variance because the number of power outliers has been reduced, but the potency of them, we argued Ristic Study was the best card in the format, arguably before, and now the other cards that competed with it are either out or have been weakened a good bit. Like Necropotent stock's at an all-time low. Ad nauseum is barely an archetype anymore. And so a lot of the power of the format is soaked up into a relatively small number of cards that have horrendous play patterns that instead of rewarding you for going later in turn order like Dockside tended to, they are much better if you get to do them earlier in turn order.
Yeah, that's a lot. Before we like really dive into it, I do want to set some like just some like personal like ground rules for like our viewers and listeners on this. I really don't care what people think in terms of one way or another. The online stuff. I'm literally just coming on here as a guy who's speaking. You know, just talking about my experience, how I feel, also my relationship with Magic I've been playing since 1998. And played in a lot of high level events and had some really good success throughout my like weird to say career because it was never a career. It's just a hobby for me. It's something that I enjoy. cEDH, I think, if anything, I took more seriously because there was legitimately something that I could contribute to the community to, and that's one of the few things. I never said standard community or modern community. Legacy wasn't a thing when I was originally playing Magic. It was, if anything, it was called 1.5, and even then it was a little bit different. But so it's my relationship with Magic's a little different. And I've had people say, well, why don't you just play blue decks, or why don't you do this? It's really simple because I don't want to. Because I don't play cEDH to be like where I got to play the best thing and I got to try to win everything. I just want to play to enjoy and challenge myself within a scope, and that's how I enjoyed it. I also saw a niche in the pre-ban format for a particular archetype that was really underrepresented over the last years. It was always talked about, and it was like a boogeyman of the table if it ever came down, but it never got respect from actual serious tournament players. As a macro opinion, and obviously we're talking about Corvold, and then I was like, well, obviously we know this card's busted with Dockside, but like it still wasn't producing tournament results. It just wasn't. And so I thought there was a area in which I could bring a lot of Magic, experience and knowledge and try to, change that deck. And without sounding arrogant, I think I did that. I've put since when did Strixhaven come out?
2021, I think.
Yeah. So I've been on the database since then, which that was the kind of the premium, like, where you'd go to look in decks and stuff like that for the populous holes before like Top Deck or EDH Top 16 came out, and now there's various sources and stuff like that. So that's how long I've been iterating on that list and that deck and just revamping and trying to create something that's playable in a tournament atmosphere, knowing that it's handicapped not being blue typically. And that's just the nature of the format. And I've said, I don't know how many times, Matt, have I said where it's like, I understand like this isn't a tier 1 deck. I understand it's these decks. I never put my personal feelings of my deck over what the data or just what we know as kind of common ground theory of these decks are good. Like at the time it'd been Blue Farm, Rogsai, Sisay, Kennen, so on and so forth like that. those types of things. So it's not like I'm in this bubble and I'm just like, oh man, they took away my dark side. It's like I'm able to completely separate myself from that and still look at the game from a holistic and health perspective. And I think I'm one of the, I don't say a few people, but I think I have a fairly good grasp on like Magic as a game because I have been a part of it for so long in different levels and stages. So I do want to just kind of like want people to preface it like and understand like where I'm coming from. I'm not just like I'm not going to be doom and gloom about this or anything like that. I'm just looking at it from a pure like personal view, a holistic view of what I see from other players in tournaments and what the numbers show. So that's what I'm going to do. If you got something nasty to say in the comments, you're wasting your breath. I'm not going to read it. If you really felt that strong about it, you'd reach out to me. Because the internet, because Matt and I talked about this off camera, and the only reason I'm saying this is just because we haven't recorded in a while, and everyone is free to their opinion. They're not free from criticism. I'm not free from criticism. Matthew's not free from criticism. You guys can think whatever how you want, but in reality, ultimately, if you're not presenting an actual conversation or an art, if it's a point, or if you just say his opinion's bad, and then that's your comment, thanks for the engagement, I guess. But it's not going to get you anywhere. That's not how you engage with other people. That's not how you have good, productive conversations. If you don't agree with something, that's great. Present another solution. Present something different, or explain why you think it is this way. So I just want people to kind of understand, like, that's where I'm coming from. Because guess what? When I get off the podcast, I'm going to talk to Matt for maybe a little bit, and I'm going to go take my dog out. I'm not going to lose any sweat over it. So this is just something that I do for fun and I enjoy versus like an actual like livelihood thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And that's one reason I kind of prefaced with saying I don't really, I think for the most part, my opinions don't come from a perspective of myself as a player, because I think that's like the smallest, like it's like the smallest slice of me that is part of the community. Is like, I do play in events, I do play the game. I don't think of mini games from that perspective, because it's just like I try to be bigger and think about a game from a more fundamental level of like, what actually is this? Like, a lot of my early content was like Magic from a game design perspective, Commander from a design perspective. Um, and
It's
I
actually one of the videos that you originally posted back when you first getting started that kind of blew up a little bit was about like Commander itself.
Yeah.
And that's what I was going to say. And I'm so glad you brought up that point. If people haven't watched Matt's early content, that's literally where his heart and soul came from, was accessibility and game design, and what's the kind of issues with Commander moving forward. And it's funny how that was how many years ago?
I want to say I did those in 2022. And I think that was my earliest videos are horror movie reviews. Those are still there if you want to watch those too. They're not very good. 'Cause this is my first attempt to do anything video related. Just literally woke up that day. I was like, I'm doing it. But
we did one on Jaws got posted, but the one we
yeah,
lost
we did
was
one.
Silver Bullet.
Silver Bullet.
We did
Yeah.
we lost Silver
Where I
Bullet,
did
which
that.
was oh man, that was like actually a pretty good one too. So
Yeah,
that stinks. Silver Bullet,
under wraps. Silver Bullet.
great werewolf movie.
But I really don't, and I think another reason I wanted to say that is because a lot of people, that is like where their opinions come from. It's like even whether it's conscious or not, they're thinking about how it affects them in their games, and that's you get to choose your level of investment and involvement. But I do think it is a smaller view if you try to just think as a player and just like how it affects your games. And I think it tends to lead to people making either more closed-minded opinions or just like an opinion with a smaller view that they could have, like if they really open it up. Because I think if your opinions are just based on like what benefits you in a metagame, and you'll always have that, people want the cards that they like to play with, they want them to be better than the other things. Like for a lot of players, not everybody, like I want my deck to be better, I want other people's decks to be worse, I want the ban list to favor me, blah blah blah. And that applies to a lot of people. But again, like Eric and I were kind of both kind of saying, we're not really that invested in just winning all the games, being the best, etc. And it can be, like he was saying, wanting to play the things that he enjoys and just trying to make do with what he has, or my perspective, which is just like, I mainly care more about the community part and people being able to play the game and it being a game worth sharing. That's the big thing for me. Right
Right.
now, I don't even really want to recommend that people get into cEDH. That's the position it is, which isn't, oh, I'm losing events. Within like the last 6 months, pre and post ban, I have top 16 events, I've won events, pre ban, post ban, I've done bad events, whatever, all of it. I don't feel any different at any of the end of those events. I went there and I played Magic, and that was it. Whether I did well or poorly, whatever deck I was playing, if it's Rogsai, Rogthras, TNK, doesn't really affect me. That's just not the thing I care about. It's cool to get to win. By the next day, you're over it. Like
Yeah.
it just that's all. That's what it is. Like you're not winning a life changing amount of money. You just played Magic,
Definitely
right?
not.
You know, like
Right.
it's cool when you get to win and be like, you know what, I showed up today and I, of all the people, I was the last one. That's cool, but it isn't the only thing you care. I care about at least, and that's like a sliver of myself as a player. And again, I try to think more from a perspective of like what is actually healthy for the game. And we've talked about sort of advantage engines and like the worst aspects of, I guess you would say, a mid-range meta tend to be, for lack of a better word, they tend to feel really toxic. They tend to like really promote taking very few game actions, and they heavily punish people doing things, especially when it's like, I'm going to power out an early Ristic. When I do that, it makes you doing what I just did really bad. If you power out something of your own to advantage yourself, me doing it first, I'm advantaged. And like, that doesn't feel very good. Um, I kind of already mentioned how when you reduce the number of power outliers, you're actually kind of increasing the variance of the format because there are less things that you can do that kind of allow you to get like a really good foothold of the game, especially in decks that don't have access to like black tutors or white tutors to a lesser extent. Your ability to consistently present the very few power outliers in, let's say it's Ristic, Mystic, the One Ring, Smothering Tithe, whatever, those four, something like that. When you have less access to those, and again, those are also really benefiting the player who gets to do them earlier in turn order, especially in the case of the ones based on player actions. It ends up having this sort of warping effect that I think we've seen with like fourth seat having something like a 13% win rate. That I think ultimately, while people felt that Dockside and Mana Crypt, etc., were effects that promoted more variance and in their mind, and I get why they make this correlation, made the game more random and less competitive. I think ultimately you still have power outliers of that level, but you have less of them and they're more around like what I said, where they're more like the draw engines, etc. And they don't reward fourth ever, really. You end up actually in a position where I think the game is less competitive than ever. And I think you have a lot of people who are like, well, I drew, like, ultimately, I think a lot of opinions are influenced by like, well, I drew more cards than everyone else, so clearly I was smarter. And we've kind of talked about like the blue player mentality. I honestly, reading a lot of opinions, it really feels that way. When you're telling me that, oh, I think it's actually okay that someone resolves a Ristic and the game is all about that, and you just shouldn't be bad. My biggest pet peeve in this entire community is blaming things on bad players. You cannot give me a real argument. There's nothing to point to either. There's no objective way to say this, right? But I hear so much that like, well, if it wasn't for bad players feeding Ristic Study, it wouldn't be a problem. It triggers off of every spell. Just don't ever cast spells. You're really like, and there's no one, again, they never have something to point to. And this video will be like one of the most soapboxy things I ever do. But
By the
one,
way, Matt wanted to do this video.
yeah,
He's the one who suggested it.
one, super elitist of you to just be like, yeah, bad players ruin the game to the extent
Get
that
good,
it's like
scrub.
warping statistics. Like, one, can't be true. The average player is average, right? Unless you just think, you want to make the argument that every player in like, are the whatever 70% of players of cEDH are bad. Well, then what's the metric for being bad? But you can't say that the bottom whatever 20, let's say the bottom 20% of players, those are the objective bad players. They can't be warping the statistics around fourth seat when the average player is average. The person going first will do a little bit better, and then like good players will do a little better in every position, right? Like good players will go fourth, and they should be impacting, the top 20% of players. They should be impacting seed order about as much as a bad player impacts it. there's not really an actual argument with it, and I hear it constantly. I basically hear that, oh, I heard like, oh, there's a statistic that I don't agree with. Like, I like the post ban meta, so I think the statistic saying that it's actually less competitive, or I have an emotional response to that because I'm doing well in it, etc. And just blame it on bad players because they're not there to defend themselves, and no one will say like, oh, well, I'm a bad player and I think this. Like, I despise those arguments. I hate hearing them. We've heard it's not like it's anything new, but now I'm hearing it and I'm like, well, Ristic actually isn't bad. It's that players are bad. It's not real. There's no actual objective thing you can point to say that. And I think we should just leave that in 2024 of just like blaming X on bad players. It's kind of like when you talk about bad drivers, you are the bad driver someone's talking about. Someone like we are all the bad drivers that people complain about when they talk about bad drivers. It's the same thing with bad players in cEDH. You fed Ristic and lost the game for somebody at some point, right? We just all do it because you have to play the game. You have to cast spells.
Yeah, I have a couple of points. Remind me to circle back to the invitational. But yeah, Matt mentioned earlier, and before he went on that roll there, when he talked about he's had quite a bit of success post ban and that type of stuff. And I mean, like for me, I've got to play in 2 tournaments post ban. I won both of them. Now, granted, they weren't huge; they were like 35 and 40 man tournaments. But I mean, that's most people wish they could just win an event.
Yeah.
And I did that on some really bad variations of Corvold because I didn't know what to do. I just kind of like, what's the most powerful thing I could do? One was a food chain variant, and then one was like a KCI variant. Do not ask me for that KCI list. It is not an active list. I would not suggest it. Though I will say Glaring Flesh Raker is really sweet in an all artifacts list. If you want to play Glaring Flesh Raker, just play Teshar. It's way cooler. And that deck's actually, I think, is pretty gas. But so I've had success there. And I've also played a lot of other decks. Like I get that I'm like the Corvold guy for tournaments, or was, but in my testing prep, I play all the other decks. Like, because that's how I learn. It's not just getting to play against Rogsai. I need to know how Rogsai plays from both sides. And it's no different than when I tested for the Pro Tour or tested for Nationals or any of that type of stuff. Like we did what's like a round robin gauntlet where we basically take the top 8 decks. For at the time, if it was standard, it would maybe be like the top 6 to 6ish decks, and then we wouldn't factor in for any kind of fringe stuff because we didn't know. But we built our decks according to that, and then we just played like round robin just to see what we could draw any kind of conclusions from that, and also finding what decks we enjoy best. That's just how I enjoyed to play. Excuse me. But that's how I just personally enjoyed to play. And I like a lot of other decks. I just don't like them as much.
Yeah.
And I played recently where I played Yoshi Thras and played like 6 games with that and won 4 out of 6.
Mm.
And it's just one of those things. And again, it's people taking a closed off opinion and projecting it, which, and that's just one of those things that you can't control what other people think. So now I just wanted to make that clear that, it's not like, oh, they banned Dockside, I can't win. Well, I won, I would say, and I can go back and look at all my tournaments. Most of my games that I won outside of top 16 where Dockside was not involved. In fact, it was just like Breach, Ad Nauseum, that type of stuff. And then if the Dockside came, it came so far down the chain that it could have been a Rite of Flame and it wouldn't have mattered. But Dockside still made up, a 30-40% of those games, because a lot of times, like Dockside early on in the way that meta was, it wasn't as advantageous to play because it might have been Dockside for 3 or 4. Well, I can't combo from there unless I have exactly something specific. So that wasn't, that's irrelevant. Now, to circle back when you're talking about this whole people saying just bad players are bad, get good kind of thing. I was at the Invitational where I was there with some of the best players in the United States. And they all played into Ristic Study, every single one of them. So are those players bad? You know what I'm saying?
Well, it's almost like it's such a broad, sweeping statement. It can't apply to anyone other than some weird straw man that we've created, right? Like it's there isn't it's not that, hey. It's also ignores the amount, large amount of the only good thing I think Ristic Study creates in terms of making a competitive environment is there does become a lot of decision making around playing through it. Whether you want every game to be about that level of decision making, I think is the other discussion, right? It doesn't mean I think even if you could objectively show me that Ristic Study creates more competitive integrity in games, I would still say ban it anyways because the actual play patterns are terrible. And we I also think it's really weird to strive for some competitive ideal in this of all formats, just in general, right? Like I don't the bans aren't about that anyways. Like straight up, they've never been about what is competitive or like the best stuff. Like we know that from like the old RC, everything they ever said, right? That's why there's some wild like 10 mana cards that are banned. Which is really funny because they were only castable with Dockside. Now that you ban Dockside, how am I ever going to cast this Way of the Stars? Like, I'm like, how am I ever getting 8 blue or whatever that is? But I don't think it really ever makes sense to try to make the like your decisions about the ultimate competitive integrity and like what creates the most decisions. But especially when those decisions, let's say like the bans were to get that, and a lot of people think that is the result of the bans. Like we're now in the most pure cEDH meta. We just know that that's not the case right now. At least currently, what we've got to look at, the stats just don't show that. It shows that it's more likely that your seed order determines whether you get to perform well than anything else for the average player. Again, obviously, really good players, like I said, are going to do well in every seat. They're going to do a little better than the other, whatever, 80% of players. But I think in general, it doesn't make sense to continue to like excuse what are ultimately fairly bad play patterns that I think my opinion and feeling is that aren't leading to games to being more competitive.
And you play with these cards
Yeah,
yourself,
like
right? Like
it's not like I'm over here playing Orzhov.
Magda.
Yeah, yeah, like, and honestly, Magda probably is fine with Ristic Study. They probably want it to be there because
that's true.
those players get a bit. But like, if I was playing whatever Rakdos the Muscle, and it's like, yeah, I don't like Ristic Study. It triggers whenever I evoke Grief or like whatever. But no, I'm playing. Like I said, I was doing this all day yesterday. I just kept resolving Ristic Studies, and it's every game is about it. I don't think it is like at the end of it, I was like, can we just ban these cards? It's like recently the Mystic Forge player who won Eternal Weekend in Pittsburgh, whatever the US one, who was like, it was my plan, like my goal this tournament was to get Vexing Bauble banned, and I used it this weekend to win this tournament. I want this card gone. Because I don't think it's healthy for the game. And I do think ultimately the most competitive people you do actually get for the most part, I think, pretty informed opinions because those players know what they're talking about, and also like they play so much that really unhealthy warping patterns really stick out to them, I feel. So I think the top level of players you tend to see like a lot of those players were the ones who didn't like the bans initially. I feel like a lot of them still play, but a lot of them didn't like it. Like they wanted Dockside to stay around because, and this is the other thing I really want to talk about. I think we closed the format. You can tell me all you want about whatever Sultai, Azorius, whatever deck that is able to top 16. The reason they're doing it is because they're doing the exact same thing as the other decks. They're doing the same Tymna Thras, Tymna whatever X deck strategy of develop an engine, draw some cards, make some treasures off Smothering Tithe, resolve some kind of way to like sandbag something, resolve some kind of way to win, whether it's, you know, generic Thassa's Oracle win or a more synergistic win con. It is ultimately the exact same game plan. I think you have closed many things. You have closed synergistic commander focus builds for the most part from being as viable with the banning of Jeweled Lotus. I think that was ultimately the worst ban. But I think things have been closed off. Now, this is more subjective. I can't point really and say I know all the statistics and actually less decks are viable now. But my feeling on that is that we have made the game more about these two things, and that especially as we get further from the bans, I think it's going to get worse as people realize Tymna Crom, Tymna Thrasios, a couple other higher color piles are really the only thing worth doing ultimately. And sometimes people will do the same game plan a little bit worse and still be able to win or top 16, which is kind of what we saw. Like we would see pre-ban, like some random Grixis pile could do well, or some random Esper pile could do well. But now I think it is really compounded because the number of good things you can do in this format have shrunk.
Yeah, I can get behind quite a bit of that. The one thing I would like for you to or just ask and riff with me here. I've heard the sentiment where sorry, edit that out. Not sentiment, sentiment. There
Mhm.
we go. Let me try that again. I've heard the sentiment where people are saying the format's more open than ever.
Mm.
Now, is that because you see more different decks in terms of tournament play, or is it because the decks that utilized or relied on like Dockside are gone, and then just more blue decks took their spot? And it's like because when we looked at the data, I'm still seeing a lot of the same stuff. I don't see a lot of like the only real thing that's to me that's been the biggest shift is probably just been what like TNT has obviously moved up
Yeah.
in power level. But when I'm looking at everything, I'm just like, oh, there's Blue Farm, there's like, and then some decks obviously kind of came down a little bit, but it ultimately it's looking like a large majority of the same stuff and just pure like tournament perspective. And obviously, you've seen it has some new printings of cards like Master of Keys and Glarb and that type of stuff that have
Mhm.
kind of popped up in there. Obviously, they share a very similar characteristic of being Demir plus.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's any kind of both are unique in their own ways. I think Glarb is really awesome. I actually have a Glarb Doomsday Bolus the Citadel deck that's super sweet, and I really enjoy it.
Mhm.
It's really fun. But what's your opinion on that? And what are you seeing from, you've been really kind of still in the CDH space. You've done, like you said, you've done a lot of recording, you've done a lot of playing. What are you seeing? And plus you're doing tournament reports. What are you seeing from your perspective?
I think the the gut reaction, because a lot of people said this when the bans were announced. They were like, the format will be more open. Like a lot of, I would say, like whatever the average level of enfranchised player or something was like, oh, I think the format will be more open without Dockside. Um, I think, and Mana Crypt and Jewel Lotus, like those actually, Crypt and Jewel Lotus were pretty relevant in terms of affecting what is considered good enough. I think. But I think the initial thought is this slows the format by at least a turn, these bans. And because of that, decks that were a turn too slow, or were close to it, whatever, we'll say like people like to say half a turn, like half a turn too slow. Um, because of that, those decks are more likely to be viable. So like whatever, like saying putting decks into buckets or brackets of like turn 2 deck, turn 3 deck, turn 4 deck, etc., and saying like you need to be here or below to be good enough. When you, I guess when you move that number up, it does make it seem like, okay, well, more decks total will be considered viable. And then the other, I think, part of that is, okay, I don't have to be running red. Like there isn't this huge power outlier that means I have to run red, which again, like that wasn't really the case that you had to run red, but obviously like there's not a lot of good argument that Dockside wasn't like the best card for the most part to be able to resolve in a game of CDH. So I get that that was the gut kind of reaction for a lot of people, like, oh, this will make more things viable, but it kind of leaning into what I mentioned about like, well, we still have, let's say, like if you want to say Crypt, Jewel Lotus, Dockside was like a tier of card. There's still roughly like 3 or 4 whatever cards in that same tier. So like I don't think the power level in terms of like, well, there no longer is a like S tier card. Like that didn't change. There is still S tier cards. There are still cards that are as good as like Jewel Lotus, for instance, in the format. So I think when you don't account for that, then it makes it seem like the format did just get cleaned up. But like I mentioned, like you still have to, like even more than ever, you have to do the Ristic study, etc. thing, because kind of another knock-on effect of this is like resolving ad nauseum and expecting that to turn into a win is way worse than when you had Mana Crypt and Dockside. Your ability to turn tap out Nas or Nas with 1 mana left into a win is way lessened when you don't have the best 0 mana enabler, arguably. You usually did need a pip to go along with your Mana Crypt, but a lot of times that would at least get you your Talisman effect, and that would get you a pip. And then red mana, etc., to get Rite of Flame or whatever for Dockside to like be able to turn Nas into a win. Another stat we saw Datatog show a good bit before this was that Ad Nauseum is less played than Necropotence because it doesn't make sense now. Well, he didn't say this because. The because is me. My opinion is that it's because it is harder to convert an Ad Nauseum into a win, and it makes way less sense to build your deck around ad nauseum when that seems to be the case. Like you can't really, it's so much harder to pivot into especially a sorcery speed ad nauseum into a win now. It doesn't really make sense to build around that. So I think one, the Nas archetype is just not as much of a deck. Like mid range ad nauseum and turbo Nas, they both exist, but you wouldn't really look at those as like macro archetypes of the format now. I think kind of like you suggested, there are your Glarbs and your Master of Keys, etc. What are they doing archetypally different than Timna Thrasios or Timna Krom? They're not really doing anything different. I think you could argue the actual archetypes of the format are now, I don't know the exact share. Whatever, say 70% of decks are mid range. There is no successful stacks deck, which was also the case before the bans. And then there is like a sliver of turbo that's left over, and then whatever else you want to talk, you want to call your Magdas, your Sisseys, which I think Sissay has leaned more into like sort of a mid range deck that generates advantage its own way. So I think it has ultimately closed things off because the power outliers, like I mentioned, there's just less of them to build your deck around. The other thing is we literally lost the only two creatures worth building your deck around, which was Dockside Extortionist for like whatever 5 years was the only creature worth building your deck around, and then they printed Nadu, and we actually started to see a kind of a major sub archetype emerge of hidden commander Nadu decks in Kinriths, even Rogthras, Timna Thrasios especially was starting to already become a deck.
Derevi.
Yeah, Derevi especially was a big one. And a lot of those decks that people said like, oh, post-ban they'll be good now, like the Derevis and such, they're actually not. They're really not doing well post-ban because, well, my assessment is that the less synergistic your deck is, the better, because you don't really get rewarded. There's not a card like Jewel Lotus that promotes you casting your commander early in the game. So building your deck around a commander instead of building your deck around resolving Rhystic Study as early as possible doesn't really make sense. Like I think there's just less things to care about now because ad nauseum has been weakened. Here in Citadel, we're kind of already past that. And I've talking to Rogsci pilots, they don't feel like the Bolus of Citadel, Goblin Welder stuff is actually really worth doing anymore. And now those decks are, I think, getting more generic by saying, like, I actually think the One Ring is worth it now because the game is a turn slower. So I really think we have shrunk things down because the things worth building your deck around and, like, making your game plan there's just less of them. You do have cool stuff like with Glarb. I actually like Glarb a lot because it encourages you to play cool stuff like Doomsday, which is an all-in try to win the game card.
And Gush is so sweet.
It's cool, but I think that's an exception. Like there are decks, like people will mention that Azorius Turtle that Comedian did well at it. I don't remember if he won a top forward with. He does that with any deck though. Like you can't look at Comedian as your example. He's the meta game's opened up. Comedian won with this. Like he plays whatever at SCG. Literally anything could top 4 SCG also. But
I've jokingly said this, and this is a complete compliment to him. He's basically Tom Brady of cEDH, and he can take like really good decks and obviously do super well, like the Rob Gronkowski's of the world and the Randy Moss decks and those types of things. But he also can take the Julian Edelmans and Wes Welkers and then like the seventh round picks or the 6th round picks and just go and just still like make it to the playoffs. Like that's basically him. But I think I told him that, but no, that's very true. I'm going to pause for a second. I gotta go blow my nose. It's driving me crazy.
Man, too bad.
Sorry about that. I don't know why. Like my nose just randomly started itching and stuff. So you might have to edit me out, like sniff and go, because it like I noticed it caught it on the recording like once or twice. So I was like, no. I was like, why? It's just like coming out of nowhere. I brought me a little tissue just in case. It's just like I'm in a closed room that my dog does not. I'm not even allergic to my dog. But I'm just sitting here and it's just all of a sudden. But
all
right.
I know another thing I can kind of touch on real quick, and then we can.
Well, I wanted to make a point about what you just said.
Got it.
Okay, so what you were talking about just how the format feels like closed off and everything like that. But what if, the people who's playing Timna Thrasios tell you it's just fine? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's typically the people who, um, the problem is that cEDH, we're looking at this from the tournament data. We're not looking at this as cEDH as a whole. Like,
Mm.
it's really hard to quantify people because you've got so many people who still play cEDH not in tournaments. And that's probably still a vast majority of cEDH players. But
Yeah.
I think it's just common sense when you take, different colored cards. So whether, if you say like what your power outlier cards you were talking about, like obviously like Crypt was one, Jewel Lotus, Dockside Extortionist, Ristic Study, like, what are your other ones that you would put in that criteria just off the top of your head?
Yeah, probably like Smothering. I think especially pre-ban and a little bit post-ban, like Smothering Tithe was already becoming
Hmm.
one. You could argue Born Upon a Wind / Valley Flood Caller,
Okay.
Necropotence, especially pre-ban, was one. Um,
And it was definitely directly tied to the blue flash enablers,
yeah,
correct?
yeah,
Okay. So if you remove two of those, let's say two powerful colorless outliers that also enabled early commanders, and you removed the only red card on there, doesn't that condense your pool a little bit of cards? Doesn't that
yeah,
basically
yeah,
skew you to like a smaller pool of cards as what is the best thing? Because it's not like you remove Dockside and then this random new card randomly came in and became the best thing.
yeah.
Like
Like you could argue,
we
I guess Underworld Breach is also in there. So like you could say there's still red representation, but you are like you're like suggesting you are condensing it because I don't think anything shot up into that tier post ban. I
Mhm.
don't think anything replaced it. I think the best thing you could actually argue is green got a representative in Gaia's Cradle post ban. I think.
Yeah.
Um, and then arguably crop. I don't think crop rotation is there, but like starting to get in, like it's looking better. But I think Cradle is arguably like the only card that went up into that tier. But I think some stuff went into the tier below that, but it's a lot of really generic. Like I think the things that actually got the biggest boost from the bans were the dirtily 2 mana ish event engines. I think Polywog Prodigy, Archivist of Ogma, Fairy Mastermind, Deep Gnome, Terramancer, whatever. Those cards that were like, well, I might just die to Roxai like on turn 2 if I cast this. Those kind of cards got the biggest uptick. And again, those are the most. These are just like Ristic Study at home kind of cards, like especially in the case of like Polywog Prodigy, etc. Like,
That's weird. You only named blue and white cards right there. What
yeah,
about
I
what
know.
about black, red, and green? Did they get any of that like fun draw stuff?
Maybe Sylvan Library is good enough now. Maybe
I think it's probably up there. I think it's
it's
still
probably
there,
like,
especially in conjunction with other
yeah.
things like,
I think in lower
it's
color
not
green
great.
decks, like especially,
Yeah.
like I think it's probably good enough. I don't think I would play like in TNT. I think I'd rather play like Polywog than Sylvan Library. Like it's not. I don't
Yeah.
think the things there. Also, those that now. Oh, Survival of the Fittest is another one that did actually get a pretty significant boost. But it is in very specific, like in specific color
It's
combinations.
yeah, like clearly very good. Was a very good card, years ago. But it's like the format went from having mid range to explosive dockside decks to those types of things. And then, by the way, people tend to forget, you still had Atraxa, Tivit, Kennen still doing well in the dockside meta.
Mm.
Just that people just completely forget about that. Like those decks were still there.
And Nadu.
Um, and ultimately Nadu,
Mm.
yeah, and ultimately Nadu, but like those have been around for a little bit longer.
Yeah.
So you still had these decks that were still pretty good. And then you had your other decks that would pop in and out of the top like 10 or 12, that type of thing. That weren't inherently like a dockside deck, but that's just something that's just interesting to me. And again, I'm looking at it specifically from a actual reasonable point of view where it's like I'm going to apply logic here. When you remove a macro card of a particular color, not even like an archetype but of a color, and there's no other card like there's nothing even close to a dockside extortionist,
Yeah.
right? Like, and I get Underworld Breach is the most powerful end game ender, but Underworld Breach just doesn't, like, it's not like you just slam it Underworld Breach turn 3. It's just not one of those things. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, if it's in conjunction with, LED and Brain Freeze. Like it's got to have all these other qualifiers. It's still, to me, it's obviously super powerful,
Mm.
but
It is still like it's
when
a draw to red. Like I will say, like it is, but it's not eight. Like it is. It's become the
the
draw
only
to red currently.
yeah.
It's that and SWAT gamble. Like I don't think you consider gamble a draw to red. That's just like a playable red card. Like I think you need your card to be like, oh, this is something that the decks who can't do this really wish they could. I don't think like TNT's like, dang, I wish I had gamble. Like they're like, if TNT got to run breach, sure, they might run it. They got to run deflecting SWAT, 100% they would run it. Gamble, like they, I guess, like they're not over there begging to have it. Like,
Yeah. And just from like a personal perspective, the deck that my deck that I used to play, it was primarily black, followed very closely behind red, and then green was the weakest color in the list.
mm,
Like Corval for the long time was like Rakdos plus green.
mm,
Even though it had like green dorks, you only had two real green dorks in the deck, and that was Ignoble Hierarch and Birds of Paradise, because Ragavan and Deathright Shaman can be cast off respectively red and black.
yeah,
So now if you look at my list, it's black and green are like neck and neck, and then red is like a smaller percentage than what green used to be.
mm,
So because I just like when I look and I go, what red cards do I really want to run? It's just like, all right, so I'm still on Breach, Pyro Red Elemental Blast, um, insert random removal red spell,
yeah. Like,
like
are you
a
even on wheel
bolt or
now? Are you still on wheel?
yeah, but like it's obviously a tremendously it's much worse
Yeah,
in that deck specifically. Wheel was already like a card that like I wasn't in love with. I only really liked it in one particular style of list, and that was my Punt City 3 list where I ran double wheel. But it's like now it's like I'm on, Ripples of the Undeath, Sylvan Library, the One Ring, Black Market Connections, Six, those type of cards. Like the
mm,
try to and again, all those cards are probably are all solid cards in their own right, but they're not even a fraction of the power level of like Remora, Study, or Smothering Tithe. You
mm.
know,
Yeah, and a
and
lot of
there's
them
not
aren't
like
even like as good as Polywog Prodigy or
no.
like the second tier of those kind of cards.
Yeah, like Deep Note Terramancer, Archivist of Agma, those type of cards. Like I would love to have like a Ledger Shredder in like that list or something of that nature. Not just in that, but just in like non-blue and white colors.
Mm,
Specifically because like red always typically gets like I don't know, like whenever your opponent does something, they take a damage. Like Omnixilus is eating good, every set, but even that deck's had to, very much change like a lot
yeah,
what it does.
losing
But
Jeweled
yeah,
Lotus and stuff and Dockside. Yeah,
yeah, and that's all I was trying to just make a simple point across. Like someone's gonna obviously like get on the comments and come at me about it, but it's just pretty common lot. It's pretty common sense when you decrease the. It's not like you decrease the pool and left you decreased a blue card and left the pool the same,
yeah,
right? The representation of the cards in that upper echelon tier are gone, and because they're gone, it now has a cascading effect on the other cards. Like you just did a review, and me and you talked about it of the your thoughts on the top 10 best cards of the year of new cards. I don't know why people didn't get that. Like you were in your comments, people were like, well, I think Fairy Mastermind's really good, and da da da. It's like it's not a card that was printed this year.
yeah. Which some of that might be, especially for the newer cards of people like who just the post COVID, like I don't know what time is, I don't know what year it is anymore. Kind of
Yeah,
thoughts of like because it is easy for, and especially as many Magic sets come out, it is easy for it to bleed together. Of just like, what do you mean? Esper Sentinel just came out. Yeah, whatever, Grandpa. But
but what I was gonna say is like a Necrodominance, a card that was clearly very powerful when it came out, and
mm,
obviously specifically went into Rogsai, and because of the things of like Born Upon the Wind and the Otter when the Otter came out, and then you got to also see it had the support of like Mana Crypt and Dockside Extortionist to convert that like a post effect.
yeah,
That card didn't even make your top 10 because of the decline of Rockside obviously Necropotence being a big one, being the best one, but then that just kind of makes Necrodominance not nearly as playable. I've only seen Necrodominance outside of Rogsai in like maybe one or two decks. Like I'll see it occasionally in it was in the European Yidris list that
Yeah.
the top 16, which was sweet. That deck was on every draw engine known to man. Nas, outside of Bolus Citadel was on like what? Nas, Pier, Sylvan Library, Ripples,
Mm,
Necro, Dominance, Necropotence. Like it was on all of them. So
yeah. And
they were
Nec-
that was pretty sweet.
Necrodome probably should have made my honorable mentions. I probably should have mentioned it, but I definitely wouldn't have put it in top 10. I just don't like it is basically a one commander specific card at this point. Even before the bans, it was like fairly specific to that, but more people were testing it. But yeah, now it's like we don't even see as much Necropotence post ban. Like there are less Timnacroms that are running it. I want to say that that was another thing Data Talk had posted, that TNKs that were running Necro post ban were being were performing worse than ones that were running or that weren't running it. So it might be a kind of a theme where you're just like cards that push towards wins, not as good, harder to resolve. Like, and people will say like, well, what's the diff? You know, what does it matter that like Crypt is gone for Necropotence? Like, you know, well, land Crypt Cabal Ritual. Like that was a way to turn one Necropotence. Like, and when your Necropotence comes down and the resources pre and post Necro are huge, it's a resource intensive card. Often you have to 2-for-1 yourself to cast the Necropotence because of the triple pip density. Also being able to resolve Dockside into 3 black for the treasures, the Necropotence. Like doing that and getting the resources for it is difficult. Like it is a thing. And so every bit you take away from it, you start to make it harder to resolve and harder for it to be worth it.
Yeah, and you also see a decline in talismans,
Yes.
right? Because again, the crypt allowed you to convert that colorless mana into like a talisman effect, whether it's like a talisman or a signet or something like that. You still see Arcane Signet and Felwar Stone and typically like one talisman, but you don't see nearly as much of the double to triple talismans plus those 2 other cards as well.
Yeah.
And because the format is slower, you're seeing that cascading effect of like Felwar Stone's played more than the second or third talisman effect was, because you're not trying to go for it inherently on turn 1 anymore. I just think that those like little small things are fairly interesting to just kind of take an eye on. And that right there to me doesn't necessarily inherently determine the health of a format, is like whether or not talismans are getting played or not.
Yeah.
That's not it. It's just that it's a limiting factor of like what you can do.
And it's something you can easily point at of like, we can tell this is having an impact because we're seeing less of this. So like, it might not seem like Mana Crypt is changing that much, but you also see like when the game slows down, you have less City of Traders, you don't have the Mana Crypt, and now so you just have Ancient Tomb as that like power out a talisman effect card. So like it is impacting deck building when the sort of knock on effect of how the game is changing. And then so like you can obviously apply that to other things not being viable or other things starting to be better. But again, a lot of the cards that are starting to be better are just what's my second best or third best version of engine
Ristic
that
City.
yeah, it's like a Ristic. Like I mentioned, Gaia's Cradle has gone up because green has gotten better. But Gaia's Cradle is also a card that gets better in longer games because you're more likely to have more creatures. So like when the game gets slowed down, some cards inherently do get better. And as Storks have gotten better, you know, that's the thing too. But yeah, I think we've kind of talked about it a good bit at this point, but it feels like too much of the power to me is in a relatively small number of cards, and that decks that have access to those tend to be the best. And when you have that situation where it's like, well, mostly the blue, white, and black cards, because the black cards find the good blue, white cards, or you know the other good black cards, the ones that power out the other cards more than that, and then just like consult obviously and Tainted Pact. So you have just like, well, we're consistently building around just how do I most consistently resolve an engine, and I don't think this is a good spot for the format to be in, and it looks like things are kind of like reflecting that is the case.
Yeah, it's been interesting just to watch it unfold and just looking at the tournament results and everything. I remember what was it, like SEG, when right after the bans first happened, Goto won that tournament, right?
Yes.
And then everyone goes, see, look, that right there shows you that the format's healthy. Well, as if anyone's ever played any type of 60 card Magic when there is a rotation, uh, typically what people gravitate to in a big format is red aggro decks good because it's going to be the most consistent deck with minimal playtesting. So if you like if you had a rotation and let's say that you got to keep, right now if you play standard, all the mice from Bloomburrow, Monastery
Mm.
Swift Spear, Slick Shot Show Off, and all the burn spells, it's probably the best deck. And it's already top deck as it is now, but people will gravitate to that because that's the first thing, especially the immediately like post ban, and that's great. We know Godo can spike an event. We've seen it, but outside of that, we're not seeing Godo pop up. So just because one deck had one instant of a good result does not it's not this automatic thing. The reason why we tout decks like pre-ban, especially because we haven't really talked anything post-ban too much of I mean, I never played Blue Farm in a tournament, but I knew Blue Farm was the best deck for like 2 years. And people
Yeah.
were like, no, 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 it's not. It's, whatever other 4-color pile. And we just kept seeing Blue Farm win and
Mm.
win and win and win. And we had almost I was almost like a Blue Farm defendant. And I don't even inherently like the deck, but when you see trends and you can understand and read and see how this, how the format's trending. And at the time, there was a small period of time when Najila was the best deck, or Kennen was the best deck, or Rogsai was the most powerful deck, and it was just super scary, especially in a closed off tournament.
Mm.
Those types of things. But when you see these trends, it's kind of easy to assess that. Again, I talked about it earlier. It's literally called common ground theory. It's nothing super like special, but it's kind of very recognizable by just the naked eye. But until I see like Glar being a large percentage of the format, or I don't know, you mentioned the blue-eye starfish, which that deck
Yeah.
looks super sweet. I think it's pretty cool. I've Mox fielded up a little bit, but until we start seeing these decks that are these fringe decks take over a larger meta share, but right now we're not. We're just seeing like, okay, Rogsai went down, TNT slipped right in Rogsai's spot. That's basically what we've seen. And
Yeah.
we've seen other decks kind of shift up and down, and they're a little bit over. And you do see like, I think across the world, because Europe's tournament rules for their top 16 is different than ours.
Mm.
Okay, and in terms of the United States, Japan's system is different than ours. You're gonna see different decks do well or played a different way in those environments. Now they might have a lot of overlying and overall macro likeness, but it's very, very different. Like they can restart their top 16 game
Yeah.
and just play another one. We can't do that over here. At least in the platinum events that I've played in,
Yeah.
and now they've changed it over there. Now they've added a 30-minute time cap to because they just released their updated rules for over there
Mm.
in Europe. So they've had some different changes and stuff. So you could probably find that on like whatever social media platform you're looking on. But because I took a quick glance at it, but they didn't address the fact that you could restart top 16. Like I don't think they did that, which is and as it's that just shows you what kind of format we're in.
Yeah.
That right there.
I think when players feel like they need to do that, that usually is a bad sign that like, well, we're in a game that's so bogged. And that's kind of what you can look at. Like I've kept kind of alluding to players who think that like everyone just playing a bunch of engines and just like whoever happens, like whoever comes out on top of that game is like, that was the true winner. That was like, that had to be the most skilled pilot. It can be the case, but what you're really seeing like when players get down to like in those situations is like when we all have like multiple One Rings, Polywog, I'm copy enchantment, heuristic study, like and all these different things. Like, oh, I have a copy artifact on this, and then I'm in a metamorph version of that. Like, and it just becomes this super bogged down state. It gets to a point where it's like no one can comfortably feel like they're positioned well because every game action draws so many cards. It's like a randomizer. Like it's almost like a multiplier of the variance of like who wins every engine that hits the board, because once there's enough of them, it just feels like it's totally random. It's just like, well, who's gonna happen to draw the best cards in their first 10 or whatever outside of it? Are we gonna, between all of us, is like the first person who gets to cast a Grand Abolisher, are we all gonna actually hit a thing that can hit that? Like it starts to just feel like it gets too random, and then the players are like, they get to the point where they're just like, I don't feel especially well positioned. I feel like we're all even. Let's just restart because this game's too bogged down. Not a great place to be. Also, you kind of mentioned the Godo thing about people would say, "Hey, look at this." No one said, "Hey, look at this." When I covered that European event where there were 7 Timnas in the top 16, they're like, "Hey, look at this. The format's bad." Like it's you don't want to be too picky or too cherry picking with this stuff, and that's like why we tend to look at everything. Though I am starting not to cover events because they look miserable and I can't sell them as interesting. Straight up. Like that is just behind the scenes look at the videos that I'm doing. So many top 16s, people suggest them to me or I look at them and like, okay, should I cover this? It's getting harder to want to cover an event because so many of them just look, it's just going to be me explaining the slight differences between these different piles of decks,
Yeah.
of high color piles.
Of the road to Lisbon, how many total Timna and Croms are in top 16?
I think it was 5.
Total?
I think it was
Like,
I
like
think
5 Timna Croms, but like how many like other like Timna decks as well?
I think it was 5 TNKs, 2 Timna Thras is what I want to say. It might have been 3 Timna Thras, but I want to say that was, I know it was 5 TNK because I made a dumb tweet about it.
Yeah, because there's like 7 or 8 effectively.
And I want to say there was I want to say it was 7 Timnas. I don't remember if there was another non-TNK Crom deck. I don't think there was, but
No.
I don't think.
Sadly not.
I know there was like 7 Timnas though, because there were 2 TNTs. Because I think there were like 2 in top 4 or something like that. I know they were 2 close together in somewhere in the rankings. I think
the tale of 2 Timnas, but a great example is that tournament. Like a deck that I really liked in that when that was a 5-color pile was the 16th place Kenrith list because it was the Doomsday Bolus Citadel Hermit Druid list.
Yeah, it's awesome.
And everyone's like, see, it's open. You can play that. And it's like, okay, well, if that deck happens to be like the next best Kenrith list, then we should start seeing that deck more often.
Yeah.
Right?
It shouldn't be a one-off.
It shouldn't be a one-off. If it's that good or if it's that viable and it's kind of like that meta breaker, that meta buster that you're looking at, then that deck will start catching fire, which I hope it does. I think it's really sweet. But in reality, it's probably going to be like the 3rd place list, which I thought was quite good, was that like just good 5-color 20 plus something creatures, I think 20 some odd creatures somewhere around there. Chatterfang Warren Soul Trader list, which that list looked pretty good because outside of the Notion Thief and the Zur, the Enchanter, the list was ultra streamlined. Like it was just the 5 best dorks, Thassa's Oracle, Tenderwall, those 2 combo pieces, and then your best creature slots like Orcish Bowmaster, Opposition Agent, so on and so forth in there, Esper Sentinel, Ranger Captain, Grand Abolisher. And then you had obviously Trimnick's Blue Farm list, and there's multiple versions of there was two exact lists. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
you really
which is awesome.
You should see, because really I think what tends to actually happen is when a deck that really stands out does well, it gets overrepresented in terms of like a bunch of people decide they want to play it because they're like, oh, this looks sick, and they play it. And then if it's good, it will stick and it'll continue to stand out. But what a lot of times happens is you never see it in top 16 again because it isn't actually like ready to hang with the rest of those decks. It's not actually positioned super well. It just either had the right palette at the right time or whatever you want to account it to. Like we mention this all the time. Any deck can get there. Any deck can do the thing in one event. Like there's no question. That's been the case post ban, whatever. You can do it. For me to say, oh, it's an open meta, whatever that means, however you want to qualify that, you kind of need to see a lot of decks performing similarly well. And right now, we don't see that many doing like on the level of like Timna Crom, Timna Thras, whatever. It's like 2 decks at that level, and then there's a bit of a gap, and then there's decks that are doing similar things, whatever. But there's not like, oh, there's like we went from, because I would say pre-ban, we had 5 decks, basically, right? It was like Well, maybe 4. TNK, Sisay, Nadu, Roxai. There are 4 tier 1 decks, I think.
Hmm.
We're probably at 2 now. Probably. Hard. We'll have to look at it, but like, I don't think Sisay is working to be still at that tier with Timnacrom, Timnathras. Roxai certainly isn't. I think it's definitely like the tier below that. It feels like to me. I don't think Kinnan has stood up. I know it's starting to do well again. Tivit's starting to do well too. Um, it doesn't feel like more decks went into that, or that there aren't. Because I think the ideal would have been there isn't that tier 1, and it's like it's so wide you don't consider it like there's like an outlier of like it'll be these 2 decks. Like when we went to the Invitational, it was like these are the 4 decks that you're gonna see. I,
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think it's had the effect that people hoped. Again, it's weird because the bans weren't intended to fix our format necessarily. The one thing it definitely has done is made it feel more like we're playing casual. I can say that. It's actually, in terms of accessibility, it is easier to recommend to casual players to play cEDH because it's way more similar than it used to be. Because it is like you're going to sit around, cast some of these things. The card pool is smaller relative to what's viable in casual, but you want to sit around and resolve things that get you some advantage over time, like even a lot of casual decks do. That's what you're doing now. And you don't have to worry about people winning on turn 1 and turn 2 nearly as often. People are way more likely to sit around behind their Polywogs and their copy enchantment on Ristic or steal enchantment or whatever. I think that's way more where we're at, and I think it sucks.
I had something and I lost my train of thought because you yeah, I'll have to give me a second to think.
Yeah.
Obviously, we'll edit this out, but
I wish I had a better point to land on. I just don't. Other than like we could mention things we don't want around anymore. Like if they were actually banning for cEDH, kind of like you mentioned with like the color outlier, like the what outliers are in different colors. You could throw Bowmasters into there too for black. I think if they had hit Ristic, Smothering Tithe, Bowmasters along with the other cards, format would probably be fine.
yeah.
It would be slower. I don't know that I would love it as much as I did pre-ban. In terms of like what's generally good, what play patterns are, like being rewarded, what the game is about, I think it would be so much better.
Yeah, Bowmasters is an interesting one because I feel like my experience with Bowmasters is completely different than, what I see a lot of people talk about how they hate Bowmaster, and it's like that's warping around the game and obviously punishes green creature decks, which it does. But when I'm looking at the data and I'm looking at Timna Thrasios doing really well,
Hmm.
which is a heavily creature based deck, I don't see like I'm not seeing it. I
Yeah.
don't understand. Is the Timna Thrasios the one with the last Bowmaster? I don't know. There's so much context to that, and the reason why Bowmaster to me wasn't a problem prior into the metagame is because games didn't go in the pre-ban. Games didn't go as that long, so Bowmaster didn't have the opportunity to dictate the pace of the game.
Yeah.
Like the only time that we see the Bowmaster dominate the game is if it came off of like a turn 1 Gemstone Caverns, in like a one in a thousand opportunities for like the finals of the Invitational,
Yeah.
or the game does go very long and it gets bogged down, and then the Bowmaster does take over that game for whatever reason. That's those types of things. But like the games where it was like the quote the just win meta,
Mm-hmm.
I just didn't feel the effects of Bowmaster just dominating the game.
Yeah,
Now,
I don't think it did too, because like we had seen like rock size were cutting it, right? Like which was a big representation of that metagame at like the Invitational, at, like the peak of like just win or whatever it was. There's no, like we're not running Bowmasters, we're not running Force of Negation, maybe no Force of Will either. Very different.
yeah. These are just opinions. People are going to have different opinions, different play experiences. We're just kind of looking at it from just a perspective, like an outside perspective looking in, and just, our game experience and stuff. The things that I do like about I don't know, the shift in the format is I do feel like I do get a chance to kind of develop a little bit.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if I don't have like turn 1 like land dork into turn 2 draw engine, then I feel like I'm just so far behind. Or some type of advantage engine like 6 or those types of things, because he doesn't inherently draw cards, but he gives you card selection sometimes and also cards in the graveyard that type of stuff. So I will say that those hands are very, very like dependent on that. And you might keep a less powerful hand just because it has resources like lands, mana dorks, into something like that instead of a like I'm going to mulligan for a specific type of hand or attempt to find a specific type of hand
Mm.
that tries to end the game because you don't have the ability to do that. I also think certain other cards got a lot worse um because of the banning. I don't think defense grid is good at all.
Yeah.
Because I don't think
Yeah.
the deck exists for defense grid. Like I think Rockstar still plays defense grid, but there's too many Seaborn Muses in the format and too many people holding up mana.
And like, yeah,
So
Smothering
I
Tithe really makes that.
yes,
Like I saw at the boil someone just pass on defense grid because and then they just start paying to interact through it. So they just say,
yeah,
well, I know I have this many cards and this many treasures. I know I'm gonna get to untap with your defense grid. I'm chill with it. You can have it, dog.
yeah. So that's like a card, and then again, that was one of the tools that the turbo decks got to utilize to help push through a win to end a game.
Mm.
And I feel like that tool is now gone. It's not inherently just about the cards that got banned. It's about the cascading effects of it. Again, it's limiting a completely different archetype. It's not like you look at like, man, Turbo's too good. Let's ban ad nauseum. And I get it. The bans weren't specifically dedicated to cEDH, though I
Mm.
have a really hard time thinking that that was not an intended like splash effect.
Yeah.
Was to
Especially
affect
hitting crypt.
cEDH. Yeah. Like I just also too just Jewel Lotus in general. Like, I mean, like it's like if you tell me you want to ban Dockside and then just leave the other two, or ban Dockside Nadu and leave the other two, then it sucks. I love Dockside. It's one of my favorite cards of all time, but I'm okay with that. Like I'm okay if you just wanted to take Crypt or just take the Jewel Lotus, but
Mm.
to fundamentally take all three and then another card, and now we're speaking of Nadu, legacy people are calling for Nadu to be banned. So
Yeah, and it already went in modern too. So we're trying to
the
get
the
trying to get the full Grand Slam there.
yeah, I need to see if I need to check the European winning breakfast list. Was it just pure breakfast or was it breakfast Nadu?
I hadn't looked at Europe.
But yeah, just an
Uh,
interesting card. I will
the-
say like I said, some other cards, like it's nice seeing dorks in green being played again a little bit more.
Yeah.
But it's really very much favoring like the green decks that again, Simic plus. That's what I really see.
Yeah, it's not like we're
Um,
suddenly seeing Marwyn pop up again, or like things like it's just like the dork centric piles, or green centric piles are playable more instead of like, yeah, especially like a Gruul deck. Good luck doing anything in Gruul, dude. Like some Matali players will still be able to spike something, but like, what a Gruul commander would have to do to be viable after these bans. Which I guess we have seen Aaron and Street Urchin still do things. That's a deck that really benefited from things slowing down a bit too, I think. Because that like one thing that preyed on them was just like good rock side pilots. Just kind of sure you can spend your 6 mana on your commanders or whatever and start pinging stuff. I'm just gonna win turn 2.
yeah.
But oh, there's another thing I wanted to mention. Oh yeah, one thing I think that has led some people to be like okay with the bans or fine with it is like kind of a part of the like blue player thing almost is like the idea that there's almost like a moral superiority of like not playing a deck that tries to win fast, and that like turbo or aggro or whatever in another archetype is like the unga bunga. Those are the bad guys where they're barbarous, clone the weak ad nauseums, are righteous, Ristic studies and smothering tides. Like I think that has fed into some of it too, and it's just total nonsense too. I mean, we could go into way
No,
too much
Matt.
detail on like how actually it's probably more skill intensive to have to like find windows and push win attempts than it is to sit around all day and just counter spells that say win the game on them. But
Whoa. So you're telling me that Commander cEDH players have a moral superiority over their fellow player for certain colors and archetypes? That would never. There's Magic players aren't like that at all. I think you just described a large swath of just Magic players in general. It's always been the a very very common theory, and or not a common theory. It's just been a very common thought philosophy that blue gives you more selection typically, so it gives you a lot more opportunities. Uh, I will give you a little small trisket here. So back in the day when Wrath of God was legal, and it was really the only board wipe that was legal in Type Two. Um, blue players thought that, casting their counter spell or their it was like counter spell into like glacial wall or into counter spell into Wrath of God. They're just so much better than aggro player. Just they're idiots. How dare they cast their 1 mana dork into their 2 mana creature and that type of stuff. And as we've seen Magic evolve over time, creatures got pushed pretty heavily, right? Like if
Mm,
you take a look at constructed formats, you know, we were talking about earlier that I think Heartfire Hero is better than Monastery Swiftspear by like a pretty large margin because it just scales. It scales so well, and it's a game ending card in a
mm,
lot of ways. But that Swiftspear is still probably the best prowess creature. But then they printed cards like Slick Shot Show Off, and so now those types of creatures do not give the control player the luxury of time to just set behind their counter spells, let one creature through, and then just deal with everything else because basically every creature that they print and they play now can just kill you.
mm.
All of them scale. The worst creature in red green aggro and standard, like Hired Claw, just keeps growing every turn. So that play style doesn't exist. And if you look at current Magic now, people complain why aren't control decks, why aren't control decks, played more, or why aren't they competitive more? It's like because creatures are just better.
Yeah.
Like creatures inherently are just better. Like it's not like where it was just Termagoyf ruling the field. You have Termagoyf at 1 mana now, like in black.
Mm.
Termagoyf doesn't even see hardly as much play. You just have better things you can be doing. So that whole philosophy of just setting behind and just expecting to be better because you're playing that type of strategy, to me it's very flawed and understanding, and I think it's a good understanding to be on both sides of that because maybe the control deck is just the better deck in a constructed format, or the aggro deck can win beforehand. I played, in fact, it was, I got a notification on Facebook when I played in Star City, Nashville. Big event. It was right after the release of Zendikar. So we got fetch lands legal in the format and Goblin Guide, step links, that type of stuff. So there was Jun, a control deck, and then like some whatever other like random decks. Like there was like a mono green deck, and then like a 5-color Cascade list. Well, I chose to play Boros Landfall. So like my creature SWAT was just pretty much like step links, Goblin Guide, plated GOP'd, Goblin Bushwhacker, and I got to play Bolt and Path Legal and Standard, which was really nice.
Mm.
And Burst Lightning. So those were my 12 spells. And then it was lands, and then Ranger Captain of Eos. I went my only loss in that tournament was to, like a 5-color Cascade deck. That's it. Like, it just punished all the control decks because, you go aggro, play Ranger Captain Eos. Your only answer is a Wrath of God effect, but I've already got, or whatever.
It's like Ranger of Eos or
Ranger of Eos. Yeah.
yeah,
Sorry, I'm just so used to Ranger Captain
yeah,
Eos.
I know.
Ranger of Eos, which allows you to get 2 creatures.
Yeah,
It's a
2/1
4
drops,
mana
right?
3/2.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2/1 drops. So you would typically go get like step links and Goblin Bushwhacker, play your step links, play a fetch land, crack it, pump the step links, play Bushwhacker kicked. Now you're attacking for 2, 5, so 7. So you typically are going to kill them post Wrath effect, and at the time is Day of Judgment, but you get the drift.
Which it is now too in
Again,
standard Day of Judgment.
yes, it is. And so that type of push and pull was a way to outthink, or not even outthink, but out strategize those kind of decks. And, the dumb aggro player, oh, he got lucky, he curved out, that type of stuff. And no, it's just a card choice that allowed me to put me in an advantageous position to punish that. Just like when Sphinx Revelation was really, really big in the format, in standard. I play Skullcrack main. And I just didn't play into Sphinx Revelation. When they go to Sphinx Revelation, you skull crack them in response. Now they drew a bunch of cards, but they only have like 6 mana. So you can only cast so many big board wipes to get you back into the game. So then they do that. You untap, you just punish them with like Goblin Rabble Master, those types of things.
Mm.
And I think too, it follows a philosophy of the Dirtly mindset, where the more toys I get to play with, the more I feel like I'm superior. And I get it. I know what it's like. Sometimes whenever I would like play like some do nothing, draw a bunch of cards, grind game, but I couldn't win the game because that's what I was doing. And there was definitely tons of standard environments like that. And I feel like cEDH ultimately is, and this is where, cEDH is EDH. And I just think that's where a lot of EDH mindset and mentality is. And a lot of that's carried over. You don't see a lot of 60 card players coming over to play cEDH. You see a lot of EDH players coming over to play cEDH.
Yeah.
And like, I'm uniquely, I guess, different in that because I came from 60 card to play cEDH. So it was a little bit different for me. So I just think that there's a lot of personality that goes along into it, and ultimately where people are tied to that and they just feel like they have more agency, which there's nothing wrong with that at all. I'm not poo-pooing on people's choices of what decks and stuff they're playing, but to sit there and utilize like, well, because I get to do X, therefore the format's great, or therefore the format's healthy.
Yeah.
And we're still, go ahead.
I was gonna say, you kind of get, I think one part about it is now that like the interesting thing about in general, like any Magic format or just card game, aggressive decks versus control decks is like there's usually a push pull of who is too greedy and that player, and who doesn't actually play the matchup right, and that player will usually end up getting blown out by something. They'll do something wrong. They choose not to play around this. They don't think about it, etc. And usually in like, it's really common in like coverage of like 60 card Magic where the the pro player playing aggro plays it so much differently than all the commenters who are like, why doesn't he just do this? Why doesn't he cast his 3-drop? Why not this? Because they're playing around like everything, and they're planning so many steps ahead, and it's like way different than just like the person who just curves out every time. And the control player who has to decide like, is my thing worth this? Because like a lot of times the way you punish control is like play things that aren't worth them countering or them blowing up, and just play a bunch of them. And that push pull kind of like existed in cEDH of like, okay, a lot of times with the mulligans and how you choose to develop, where it's like, am I gonna get greedy and develop my engine, but I have to tap out to do it? Versus like the aggressive deck that's going ahead of me or whatever might be pushing an early win attempt. And like that push pull of turbo deck that is going to try to blow you out for being greedy versus you sitting there eating your vegetables and saying, you know what, I'm going to keep a responsible hand. I feel like for the most part, that's gone. There is not that tension of like, what if he has like turn 2 land, pedal, Thoracle Consult, like, or just whatever, like because that obviously still works, but because there's fewer combinations of aggressive thing that blows me out, you're way more just defaulting to play greedy. I don't have to worry about it, whatever. And everyone else also being encouraged to do that means like the whole table gets to choose to just, well, we're all just going to sit here for a while, and no one has to eat their vegetables. We're just going to eat dessert all day. And we're just going to draw cards and eat ice cream. And those evil players who are trying to end our games of Magic at a reasonable time. We don't have to
evil players eat meat.
We don't have to worry about them.
Those evil players who are on the
those
the
elk meat
diet,
eaters, dude. They're out there eating elk and no seed oils, and we gotta get rid of them.
Oh, they're so bad. You just described me, but that's okay. It's when you said that, when you said the players being responsible eating their vegetables, and I thought of the scene from Spider-Man 2, the Sam Raimi version, when he like leaped over a car when he was trying to deliver the pizzas, and a little kid goes, how'd you do that? He goes, eat your green vegetables. And I just think that that's it. Like, well, how'd you land that heuristic study? Eat your green vegetables.
Yeah.
But I actually think that that's really interesting, because I think what you were saying about the turbo mid-range, like kind of, and really mid-range was the control, right? Like that's what mid-range,
how we would equate it to in like, see, there isn't really control as an archetype, as the way that there isn't aggro really as an archetype. Those are like Sort of the
Yeah.
equivalents that we have.
Yeah, like Talion would be like to me like a control deck, like a
Yeah.
true control list. Um, but I think that's really interesting because, like you said, like the turbo decks or the aggro decks, right? Whenever people got greedy, they got ultra like whenever in tournament play. I mean, now when everyone just got greedy, it was whoever was the greediest one. So
Yeah, because you go
that
bigger
was
than everyone else.
right. But when there were people who were like in like Punt City 3, this is right before we got to the pure, this is right as Rogsai started to peak because we had the two Rogsai decks that were in top 16,
Mhm.
Zane and Tad. My matches, pretty much a lot of them came down to people just being like, "Oh, I mold a 3. Here's my draw engine," and then everybody else like, "Well, I gotta develop before," and then I'm just like, Dockside Extortionist," and they're like, "Oh, I can't believe the Corval player had the Dockside. Did you have it in your lap?" And heard that every round, and I was like, "It wasn't in the lap."
I know. Oh my god.
It was the saw in half. The Dockside was naturally tutored for it. Like. Via gambled and discarded. That's the funny part. Anyways, um, but yeah, so there was a way to punish those draws because I already know what these other people are going to be doing. They're going to be trying to look for their Ristic, their Mystics, those types of things. Early on, or if it was to like potentially develop like an early commander that was an advantage engine or something like that.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I just don't think that we really have that nearly as much. Like I guess I mull for Orcish Bowmasters a lot of times. No, I don't ever mull for that card. I was joking. That's a card that basically comes into play, kills something, makes a token, draws me 2 cards off Corval because I sack him to Warren Soul Trader, and then draw 2 more cards off the treasures I sack. So it's like a 2 mana Manamorphose that draws 2 cards or 4 cards. 4 cards, 2 mana for 2. It's great.
Still pretty good.
Yeah, I just don't think we'd really have that punishing effect anymore. And it doesn't have to be a Dockside, right? Like that's not what I'm talking about. But like,
well, even just
we need
punishing in the sense of like you didn't play in a way that is respecting the table's ability to just win out from under you. Not even necessarily like you took a game action that I'm punishing by casting Dockside Extortionist. But yeah, just like you tapped out for an engine. Do you have Force of Will now? Because I'm winning. Oh, you had Swan Song that you could have held up. Oh, you didn't? Well, sucks to be, well, get good.
Yeah, and like you said, like in the 60 card formats, there's a really really big cost to figuring out like, okay, do I play my draw engine like or like when it was the Wilderness Reclamation decks like back in the day in Standard, do I need to tap out and cast Wilderness Reclamation? What if they have the counterspell or the removal spell? Because now they just blow me out and then I don't get to untap and get the trigger and then they get to develop their threat. And that's the interesting part of those games is like, that's where I think you become a very well-rounded player is know when to be the beatdown. By the way, great article. Suggest everybody to Who's the Beatdown. Really can teach you a lot of fundamentals and the philosophy of fire. I think that's another really good one that teaches you about like playing like red aggro decks that 90% still holds true to this day. It's a tale as old as time, at least with Magic. But and I'm hoping that starts kind of curating itself, and then there's something that allows the format to progress. Because personally, if it's just, I mean, it's always been about Mystic and Ristic. It really has. Mostly, I guess people really just hearken to like I think Ristic Study is the real offender here.
Yeah,
and currently because there's less like Storm variant decks, so Mystic Grimoire's power level's a little bit down. It's still it's busted. It's 1 mana, right?
Yeah, still very good.
Yeah, still extremely good. And just and we talked about this, man, I forgot what episode it was. We talked about at some point there was going to be a critical mass of these effects, and it's going to have such an overbearing effect on how the game is played.
Yeah, and especially we've got more of them. Like we mentioned, we got the Polywog. We got just in the time we've done this, we've got because Espressino was a little before the podcast, but we got the Archivist of Ogma, the Terramancer, the even counting cards from like MH3 like Ripples, stuff like that. Obviously, Fairy Mastermind, Deep Known or not Deep Known, the Polywog Prodigy being the newest like really high quality one.
The One Ring.
The One Ring being huge, like and that card being one of like there were a lot of decks that were like, I don't know, it might be too slow before. Format gets slow. Now we have another like the One Ring was definitely still a viable card to run pre-ban, but especially post-ban. It's a little harder to power out early, but it's a little less necessary to do that. Um, and I think also as the game's gotten like it's you start to see more like Manamos because like land counts are a little higher. They're like a land or two higher. So it's like a little bit freer to throw in Manamo even in your 3, 4, probably not 5, but maybe 5 color deck.
Getting
Um,
wild over here.
but yeah, there's that plus the effect of ways to push early win attempts are lessened. Like there's less ways to just win out from underneath those cards. And the game is like way more about those cards, which again, I think it is compounding and doesn't I don't know, it is like I think we're at the point now where it does feel too punishing to where it doesn't feel very good to be in a lot of games. Like I get it can work some people's brains and it can be very rewarding to like navigate those really long games that are bogged down and about those things and to win them. Like I've played them and I felt good about those games and won them and be like, "Oh, this was really cool." But when every single game is about those almost without exception, it really starts to lose the appeal to me. And again, tying that back into what we've said where like ultimately it's starting to look like it is lessening the competitive integrity sort of our format, making things way more about play versus draw because we all have a bunch of engines. Who gets to lay them out first matters a lot. Um, we don't have cards currently that are really outside of Gemstone Caverns that really benefit you for going later in turn order. And again, Gemstone Caverns is just as good in the second seed as it is fourth. It's not like being fourth is you get this unique power up with Gemstone. Just don't be first. That's still most players. Going second with Gemstone is what feels busted. That feels like awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely think we're there. And again, I play the cards. I resolve them. I've drawn many cards off Ristic Study and Esper Sentinel and all these things. It isn't just me being like, I wish I could do this. Everybody can. I'll also just switch decks. I play all kinds of stuff. I mean, you might start playing. I was playing TNT before the bans happened. Back when it was fun and you got to do Nadu stuff. Back when there were actual, in my day, there were actual archetypes of Timna Thrasios. That was one thing. That was a big lie everyone told themselves when the bans hit. Oh, we're gonna have Razakats and all this back. It's just
here comes the Hulk piles.
It's just Brewmaster, and Devoted Druid. That's the spice. And guess what? Everyone's playing it. The spice is like, oh, I'm actually on Fairy Mastermind. Like, oh man, bold today, aren't we? Like, it's just piles. I've been shocked at the lack of variety in Timna Thrasios because I thought it would be at least a little bit more. I thought there would be like, maybe a Hermit pile here, like the Fiend Artisan kind of TNT that we saw. That was kind of a thing before. I didn't expect Sacred Guide to be good enough, but some stuff. Maybe somebody tries Razakats or whatever because now it overlaps well with like Survival and Devoted Druid kind of package now. Nope, not a one. It's basically
Hulk or something like that.
No Hulk. Basically none of it. I mean, maybe some has spiked some event that I've missed, but looking at almost every major event, they're all almost the same deck. There's like a couple little things. The spiciest thing was that Jorman wasn't playing Seedworm use. That was actually maybe the most interesting thing, and that was the lack of a archetypal card being there. That actually made that interesting, but there's been very little variety.
Jorman,
there.
Who's a very good player.
Yeah, and who I remember his deck name was like, "This doesn't feel like cEDH anymore," because that's another sentiment I've heard a lot of, and I've had like a lot of the post ban. There were a lot less people coming to my store and playing, and it's harder to get games. And now some people have come back, and they're just like, "Man, this feels slow."
Yeah, our my local gold event got canceled because there wasn't enough signups.
Yeah,
so and that was kind of a heartbreaker. And then there was like a bronzathon this last Saturday, and I think they fired 3 of them or something, but it was like 16-person cap out, and then single elimination cEDH is not what I want to be playing.
Yeah, it's okay. It's like basically a way to give slight structure to just hanging out and playing. Like I'm not really thinking about it as anything other than that.
Yeah, so and just overall, like, and from what I've been told, that there is less tournament entries from top deck,
Mm.
so less people playing tournament using top deck. Now, I don't know if there's if what is it, Spice Rack? If that's
Yeah, I
somehow
think so.
blown up or something, I can't use, I don't know how to use Spice Rack. I've tried. But and the people who are very advocate of the CDH format play CDH. Like they love CDH. That's like
Yeah.
it's like their thing. I challenge you though, if you don't agree, that's completely fine. But pull yourself back. Just legitimately pull yourself back, because the really, really good smart players in Magic's history, they can pull themselves back and look at a format or a deck and not have biases about it and
Mm.
just go, okay, this deck's a problem. Think about the person who just won. We'll take a great example. The person who just won Eternal Weekend for America, right?
Yeah, the Mystic Forge. They're
Mystic
missing,
Forge
yeah.
player, right? Crushed with that. Only had one loss the entire day. And then it was like they just like crushed all the rounds. It wasn't like they just, oh, I won the round 2-1. They went like a 10-0 sweep or something nuts.
Mm.
They just kept going. They're not like, oh, no, Mystic Forge, no, this deck's totally fine. No, Vexing Bobble, no, you gotta have it. It's what helps these decks fight against the unfair stuff. It's the
Mhm.
unfair deck.
Yeah.
It's literally a colorless storm deck. Like I don't like ignore that it's artifacts. It is a storm deck. It is drawing a pile of cards, and it also has an insane secondary option in Ursa Saga or Karn. So it's got this like really powerful secondary
I've been
tertiary
playing that.
option.
The one thing I haven't done, I've basically have not done a Mystic Forge at all. I just keep winning with the One Ring and Karn, and then like sometimes the constructs, because it's like it's basically
Oh,
Mystic Forge is just like a cooler name for a deck. It's really a
yeah.
One Ring and Key combo deck, and Kozilek's
Key
Command,
ring. It's
because
just called key
you'll
ring.
just like Kozilek's Command for 10 Flesh Raker triggers, bop 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 bop, you're dead.
I really wish Kozilek's Command wasn't as restrictive to play in cEDH, because it would be a sweet card to play.
Yeah,
Like I
it's
would
like
really
one
like to play that
colorless
card.
pip. Eh,
Yeah,
Dude,
like obviously it would be probably too good,
yeah.
but like and I was like, can I squeeze it out with the Ancient Tomb and City of Traders? No, I mean it's just like one of those cards, and obviously the power level Glaring Flesh Raker, that card is pretty wild how good it is because it's a cast trigger. So and also you get to see some cool stuff in Vintage, because they get to play 4 detops, so you just
Yeah.
detop loop and just pew 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 pew. But um now that player has the sense to like, hey, I won with this deck. I understand what it's doing to the format, and I can recognize that the card that I'm playing is too powerful. I challenge players to do the same. Again, I agree. I agree that Dockside was too good. Like it sucked. I loved it, but I understand Dockside. I don't understand the other two, especially with the philosophies that they talked about and the reasoning
Yeah.
behind it. I'm like, well, you could have 5 mana on turn 2, and I'm like, you have 5 mana on turn 2 if you go like land, Soul Ring, Talisman. Anyways, like it.
Yep.
What are
You
you
do the
talking
same
about?
thing. The play they described with Mana Crypt, you literally do the same thing with Soul Ring.
Oh,
Yeah,
but but it's a pillar of the format.
true.
It's
But yeah, it's
But do you expect anything to happen? Like, do we even have like a projected date of any kind of update from
I don't think
Commander?
they've given a date, but they did say that they look to what I've from what I can tell, it seems way more likely to remove things from ban lists than add anything.
Yeah,
Um, which makes sense. I think a lot of the stuff for bans going forward will probably just be like, hey, this is bracket 4. We recommend you don't play it in your casual games. Um, and probably an emphasis on Wizards to not print things that are like super casually appealing and broken. Like Nadu was just the perfect storm of like, this is probably a card we're gonna have to ban because like it's a Simic good stuff thing that makes like it just does everything a casual deck wants to do, and it also happens to be a 3 mana commander. That was a perfect storm of like we're gonna have to ban this in every format. So hopefully less of that going forward. We'll see. But what there's some cards I would like to see taken off. I don't know if they'll take off any of the stuff that just went. I think Crypt and Jewel Lotus coming off would be the perfect combination. If they brought back Bandit's Commander, I think maybe Nadu could come back. But if they don't, I don't think they're going to undo Nadu because, again, that was kind of problematic for a lot of games. And the play patterns of Nadu are just miserable in every format. It's probably going to go in Legacy just for that reason, even if it's not a power level problem. Um, I would like, I think, as even banning for one reason I mentioned Bowmasters and Tithe is I think they, along with Ristic, are a problem in casual and cEDH for like less with Bowmasters as a problem for cEDH, but just like in terms of these are play patterns we don't want to have at any point in like any power level. I think that is a perfect trifecta of cards to ban along with what already went with Ristic, Smothering Tithe, Orcish Bowmasters, because it is just like, hey, we don't really want to punish game actions too much. Like, especially casual players will resolve like a green, Garrick's whatever, and just like draw 10 cards. Yeah, we probably shouldn't have like a 2 mana card that just wipes their board because they wanted to draw a bunch of cards in their big stompy deck with Orcish Bowmasters. Like it's maybe not the best. Whether it's too good or whatever in cEDH, I don't know. I know it can be unfun sometimes. It can be warping, whatever. Ristic and Smothering Tide is not fun anywhere. I don't care. It's not fun in casual. It's very miserable in casual. It's not fun here. Don't like it. Hit me with the bad player argument, whatever, dude. I don't care. That's another thing. These are the kind of cards that lead to really long games. Eric kind of mentioned taking a step back. I feel favored in those. I feel like if I play a game, I play a deck that plays very long games where I get to take advantage of being someone who gets to just live in cEDH world all the time and who knows all the decks and knows all the cards that everybody's running and reads people really well and knows what cards are in their hand. And it's just like whoever makes slightly better game actions over the course of 2 hours is going to win. I feel totally favored in that environment for the most part against most players. Like better players are going to beat me, sure, but like I feel like I benefit from a lot of these cards existing, and my deck is really well positioned right now. I still want them gone. I think overall it's bad, it's unhealthy, promotes the wrong things for the format, and it will be a problem that only gets worse. Like I think if they don't hit them now, they got to hit them later.
Yeah, I'm just my biggest concern as somebody who has invested quite a bit of time, energy, and just like owning these cards. And again, there's going to be somebody who's going to be like, "Well, you deserve the bans because you own nice cards." I'm like, shut
Oh
up,
yeah,
please.
that was so dumb.
Like, that is the dumbest thing that I've heard in a long time. Or cards don't have value, inherent value, and I'm like, okay,
Okay,
let me
Wizards of the
explain to
Coast.
you. Okay, let me explain to you how a market works, and let me explain to you that so if I put something, if I own something and I put it on eBay, but no one intends to buy it, so it has no value. No, it has an inherent value that someone's trying to purchase it at, just like how a stock has an inherent value. And then I get the classic, well, Magic shouldn't be an investment. And I'm like, collectibles have been an investment ever since they were around. Hence why the game is you could either call it a TCG or a CCG. So TCG, trading card game. So trading, therefore value, or a collectible card game.
Mm.
They're you can't have it one way. You can't just call them game pieces and not have any value. That's not how it works. This isn't chess. And guess what? If I buy a really nice chessboard and it's got ivory pieces, it's really expensive. It's just the nature of the format. It's the nature of Hasbro at Wizards of the Coast. By the way, I feel bad for anybody who bought Hasbro stock. It's pretty bad. Last time I checked it's been in the tanker for quite a bit. I am curious about what like Magic's going to be like, what their quarterly end of the year report's going to be in
Mm.
terms of like Hasbro as a company, Magic the Gathering, what Magic's doing, because I do hear a lot of like product fatigue right now.
Yep.
Because they just keep printing something new. Like I just saw that there's like these Bloomborough tins that are now out or something like that.
I didn't see it.
Yeah. There's like they're like the old Yu-Gi-Oh tins, but it's Bloomborough.
Yeah,
So it's
let's
got like
go.
Bloomborough, a promo that's not standard, and then standard packs.
Huh.
But my biggest issue is that I don't think cEDH is ever going to be like a serious respected format in regards from Wizards of the Coast. They claim they have cEDH representation now, but
And they did basically say with that announcement of like the new RC that they don't intend to do cEDH events. I know they do
right.
Commander tournaments like at their stuff, but like I guess their intention is never to try to prioritize like like a competitive focus on commander events that they run.
Yeah, exactly. And that just shows that whatever bans or unbans happen are not going to be for the best or the health of this format.
Yeah.
And they might just end up getting magically lucky with that, but I'm just it's just like it makes it hard for me to like be fully bought in knowing that like like I'm going to go to these tournaments and play, and it's mostly just because like the reason why I really enjoyed playing is because I enjoyed the people that I went and saw.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of those people don't even play CDH anymore. So
Yep.
that's kind of part of it. Even my personal play group, we've gotten together very, very seldom because of like because of that. Because it just like kind of like, I had two Rogsai mains in my play group. I had Najila, Sisay main. And granted, all those decks are still like very comparable and playable and everything like that. It just takes the luster and the flair out of it. And then we play as though the intent that we're going to like go to these gold events and those types of things to play to compete. So the adage of just play with the different band list or whatever like that. Well, it's like, well, I mean, then we're not really playing
It kind of defeats the
unless,
purpose too of just like,
yeah,
especially as cards get printed. It's not even like you're playing like a snapshot of that meta game, especially like when a new card gets printed. If you're not going to be like, okay, yeah, we're going to play pre whatever September CDH, and it's like, okay, well, all right, no Duskmorn cards, I guess, and all the futures are like, okay, we're not going to play with Spider Man when he comes out, I guess. Um,
yeah,
but it is, I've felt this too. And just like the past, I don't know, 3 to 6 months of that format has been really weird for me in general. We had like CDHRC thing was very strange position for me to be in. Um, just like the position as like more of a local community person, and like some of the people I was at kind of like close to in the community has sort of changed and has me feeling different about the game. um, I don't really think it's that fun right now. I think I have fun playing it, but I don't think it's because I'm playing CDH. I used to could just play CDH with a bunch of strangers and expect it to be fun. Now I expect CDH is a thing I do with people who I have fun with the people, and not necessarily like I'm not just CDH isn't inherently fun, I think, for me at the moment. It's like I can have fun because I'm playing with people I like. Just like if we played Dungeons and Dragons or something else, it would be fun. But I think those things are just more fun. I don't think CDH is adding fun to my time with people. It's just structure for us to do stuff. And it is weird. Like if when I'm thinking about this stuff, it isn't like I need the format to be what I want. It's I think in the next year we're like a couple decisions away from like the only people playing with this game, playing this format will be the people so casually invested they play like once a month anyways, and they're just whatever. They just kind of do it. There's a lot of those people, which is a big, size. And then people who are just so obsessed with CDH, they'll play it no matter how terrible it is. And you know exactly the people I'm talking about. The people in Discord on Spell Table playing constantly, they will just keep. It's just their thing. They just keep playing it. Doesn't matter if the game sucks. They're gonna keep playing it. It'll just be those people because we already like top deck stuff is already kind of out the window. Um, it doesn't feel like it's got as much room to grow, especially if the game isn't fun. It's not like I feel a particular urge to try to grow it when it isn't good. Which was the reason I did it to begin with, because I was like, well, everyone needs to know what this game is, because I think it's awesome, and I'm gonna try to help people get into it. Why would I do that now if I don't even like it? Like I do. I'm not quite there yet, but I do have a lot of things where I'm thinking like, do I start playing a different format and make videos about that? Do I want to keep doing this? Like, is there like I don't expect, it was CDH was growing more and more every year. I don't expect next year, like a year from now, for us to be like to see that level of growth the way that things are currently.
yeah. I would say a watershed moment in CDH was probably the cookout, and when you saw the growth from the cookout till
Really to the
the
envy.
invitation,
Yeah.
the envy.
Like
I
that was
mean, the
seemed like the
growth is.
peak. And then after the envy, again,
I
not
mean,
not to be
event.
super doom and gloom, but there's just a lot of stuff, like a lot of little setbacks in, especially in a grassroots community. Those things add up.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And just looking at it like from having to set a timer for when tickets go on sale, and you got to get in there the first 30 minutes. If not, if you just happen to like, oh, I'm at work, oh, I guess I don't get to get into this tournament because it's sold out so fast. haven't seen a tournament sell out within any of the time frames as previous top deck events.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I was still getting pings in the Demon Time Discord, like, oh, we need like X amount of people to fire, that type of thing. And, I don't even want to play webcam. I considered it because it was like my birthday weekend or whatever. But then I was like, nah, I'd rather just hang out with my wife and my pup and do Christmas stuff, and watch Supernatural. Which is, by the way, if you're not driving a 1967, is it 60 or 76? I can't remember.
Mm, I feel like it's got to be the
Somebody, somebody,
60s.
somebody who's a big Supernatural buff. Remind me. I
They're
know I could
already in the
just Google
comments.
it, but
They're already
yeah,
in the
they're like,
comments.
oh, this idiot. Well, whatever. The black Chevy Impala. If you're not with your brother hunting monsters, trying to kill Lucifer, what are you really even living?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Let us know down in the comments if you're trying to kill Lucifer.
Or are you his vessel? Or are you Michael's vessel?
True.
Are you a Supernatural fan? I'm a big Supernatural. We started rewatching it, my wife and I. My wife's never watched it.
Mm.
So again, me introducing a new show to her is always like, is she gonna like it? I don't know why I'm surprised. She like when I showed her The Boys, she loves The Boys. I think she likes The Boys more than I do. And then she she started she loved Invincible. She started watching Bleach. She's like, she became a Bleach fan, and I was like, all right, sweet, And the fact that she's not so far into Bleach, she was just okay with skipping to the 1,000-Year Blood War arc. She's enjoyed watching Dragon Ball Daima. By the way, Bleach and Dragon Ball fans eating good this fall, loving it. Dragon Ball Daima is basically a breath of fresh air. Really enjoyed that. She liked JJK. Mostly she liked Gojo, but she liked JJK, so she's like, it's all these things. So I was like, and she loves Smallville. Like I introduced Smallville to her and she watched a little bit of it, but we watched all 10 seasons of Smallville. Well, I told her, well, I was like, if you like a CW show and you like it long, strap in. Supernatural's 15
I was gonna say
seasons.
15.
So when we started on season 1. And you know how it is when you first watch the first season of something, it's like just golden, right? Like, and then season 2 is like peak. And then right now we're in season 5.
Okay. The scale hasn't gotten too out of hand yet.
Not yet. We're getting close. And then she's
Castiel's
like
season 4?
Yeah, because he pulled Dean out of hell.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, that first episode where you don't see Castiel, but Dean like comes out of the grave and he's in that abandoned town and he goes into the like that little quickie mart that's like an old like rundown like kind of grocery store, and he was like getting some supplies and water and all this other stuff, but the town was abandoned, and then he could hear the ringing and it shattered the glass. That reminded me of Stephen King's The Stand. Like if you've ever read or watched that series, it's like, it's like the end of time stuff, like from Revelations. Really, really interesting stuff. It was always creeped me out when I was a kid because there used to be these The Stand commercials that would come on. It was just really dark and all that type of stuff. So they do a lot of cool elements like that. So like, Supernatural's always like, it's fun. It's a fun show. We enjoy it. And, I like randomly yelling Sam, in the house occasionally.
My grandpa my sisters were really into it and would be watching it, and we would be at my grandpa's house and he would just make fun of it constantly. He would just walk in the room and just say like, I'm not a demon. Yes, you are. Because so much of that show, especially the early seasons, is just like Dean not really trusting Sam and Sam being like, no, it's okay. It's fine. And just this dumb back and forth of Sam's demonic kind of stuff he's got going on.
Sam's like, no, it's cool. Ruby's a good demon. Like, oh man, oh it's a very fun show right now. And also, like, I know it's completely off topic from our podcast, but it's nice to put a little slice of life in here. Like next year, like we get Wheel of Time season 3, Reacher season 3, Invincible. Like all with, I think, like the first half of the year on Amazon Prime. So Amazon Prime is living large the first quarter of 2025. And then we get Stranger Things next year for Netflix. So going to be a pretty big, like, pretty big year for like TV stuff, like to finally kind of either wrap up or continue on.
Mm.
I'm kind of like ready for Stranger Things to now. It's like I feel I'm just watching it because I'm obligated to, but
Yeah, I think there's probably a
I'm
lot of
not
that.
like yeah. I've like completely lost interest in the storyline and like maybe it'll be cool. But yeah, so there's lots of other things to do outside of CDH. But yeah, I think you're right. I think the people who love CDH will just continue playing CDH, and as they should. They should absolutely, because as we've said before multiple times in previous podcasts, I know some of the new listeners don't know this because they don't, or they don't listen to the entire episode of things. But we've always advocated engage with Commander the way you want to what makes you happy. And if that's
Mm.
what makes you happy, awesome.
Yeah, definitely. I don't want because I guess there's a little bit of like, hey, this like when you're trying to explain the problem with something, it can come across like, hey, you shouldn't be having fun. But it's like it's not really that. My goal isn't really to ever like get someone who's having fun to not have fun. It's for the people who feel like something's off to, but can't quite put a finger on what it is to kind of actually make them be like, you know what, that's why I don't like this. That is exactly the issue with it. Like this doesn't feel right, which especially like a lot of the earlier content of like, what's wrong with casual commander? It's hard to put your finger on it sometimes. Like this feels weird. It's like, yeah, it feels weird that you can just like kill a player and then have to sit there for 2 hours. Yeah, that other games don't do that. That's not a thing they put in games of like, yeah, there's like this whole, the game is like 2 hours on average and you can die turn, in the first 30 minutes. Like, yeah, they just don't do that in games. You don't have player elimination 2 hour games. But there's yeah, there's some issues with it. I expect to continue to do CDH stuff, but like shouldn't really be surprised if I move away from it a little bit. It's weird because it's been like kind of my whole thing. It's not like I really am, like there's no, trepidation or whatever and just moving away from the thing that like I'm totally known for online. Like that is just what I do really. And on the internet is just I make CDH videos. So it's not like it's just super easy and to whatever, just be like, nope, not gonna do that anymore. Like it feels weird. It's spooky, it's
Yeah, and especially to be fair, like your channel is very tournament oriented.
yeah.
That's where a lot of your points come from. And so there's other CDH channels out there that are just talking about CDH, like non-tournament stuff. So they're going to have a completely different lens and like type of audience that they cater to.
Mhm.
Um, typically, I guess you're more of a spiky channel.
Yeah, but because especially
um,
if you're doing gameplay or whatever, like if that's your main thing, you just get to change how you interact with it. Like you are getting to choose what it looks like. Because that is like if your engagement with the format is we just pick 4 decks that we think will be fun and cool, and that's what we showcase, then you're getting to you don't have to deal with all the baggage that comes with this is what the game objectively sort of looks like right now. Because when I cover a tournament, it's like, yeah, I can try to cherry pick events that look more interesting. When they all look like garbage, it's just, it's not as much for me to work with. With it's like, I got tired of like, okay, explaining every Timnacrom and was like pushing, I was like really shortcutting a lot of those, pre-ban. And now it's probably even worse than that. Maybe I'll get to do some stuff, but also like when what I'm showcasing is something I'm not excited to do, there's not a lot of incentive for me to do it. Like to make the videos of like, here's another event. There's like 7 Timna decks here. Look at it if you want. It's
yeah,
not.
7 Timna decks in top 16,
Yeah,
not just 7
no, not
Timna decks
overall.
as a
Way
whole
more
tournament.
overall.
If
Yeah,
that
it's
was a
just
top
like
16 in an event and those were all grief, people would be like, ban
grief.
grief. You got to ban
Finally,
grief. Maybe you just ban Timna.
yeah, and
That's
that
a
is
that's a
there's a
take.
lot of calls for like, hey, band partners, whatever. At this point, I'm down. I would lose the main decks that I play. There are a couple commanders I think you kind of have to hit for CDH to look reasonable if you did ban partners. Because like just random 5 color command like Najila stocks have to be so high, and like Kennen too to an extent. Like some other things. I've also said I'm down to just say decks can't be more than 3 colors. Whatever. However you have to do that in the rules. Whether it's just like you pick 3 colors if you're more than 3 colors, or you can't have more than that. Whatever. I'm down.
Yeah, Wizards they'll always have it because that gives them more license to print cards and sets for chase, and that's just what they're always going to do. I will say the last thing I want to touch on is Well, I said that, I'm worried that Wizards isn't going to really pay attention to CDH, or it's not going to matter having CDH representation in the community. I hope it doesn't. I hope I'm completely wrong on that. I'm not even saying that that's what I'm right. That's just my feeling.
Mm,
I also have a counter opinion, which I've talked about before. I don't think people still realize or understand that Wizards of the Coast is a company and they have shareholders. They have to basically hit certain like marks throughout the year. They have to make a certain amount of money. They're also owned by Hasbro. So if you start seeing segments of your products decrease or sales decrease or something like that. For example, let's say Modern just died, right? And let's just say it just died. They're not going to print any more Modern sets.
mm,
They're not. They're not going to like they might try to revive Modern in 5 years or put a new spin on it because that's what they did with Extended. Extended attendance was low and they shifted it over to Modern. And there was this cooling off period to where there was no format like that in the middle. It was just standard, legacy, vintage, and then limited and popper
mm,
stuff like. But and then obviously Modern came along. So if they really care about the growth of Commander, then there's going to have to be a conversation at some point, not today, not tomorrow, maybe not even in the next couple of years, in which you're going to have to look at if the demand is high enough and then there is a competitive Commander desire for a legitimate format, then at some point you're going to have to entertain the idea of making that,
mm,
because we have everything else. We have all these variation of formats, whether they're officially Wizards or not.
mm.
But you like, how many official Wizards formats are there? It's quite a bit.
Yeah, and they just added because they added what the one they just added. It's not Gladiator, right? Something like that. But between Commander and I guess Dual Commander now they recognize.
Yeah,
Uh,
I mean
yeah, Standard Pioneer,
it's an option. It's an optional MTGO.
Historic, I guess. Uh,
I
although
mean
they
the
it's a
various
lot.
arena formats as well.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, exactly. So my point is, my long-winded point is that is something I think that's going to happen, because if they see a market in that and it gives them a place to print powerful cards into, then because like I'll give the legacy players this. They're talking about like they're complaining about how there's not enough change in legacy. There's not enough change in legacy, but they don't
In
want to
terms of
touch
like
the card.
bands, like
Yeah, well, in
they're not
terms of
acting
bands,
quick enough.
yeah, they're not acting quick enough, and the amount of products that are printed all go straight into legacy. So
Yep.
if it's standard, modern, commander, it goes straight into legacy. They don't want Force of Will, Days, and all those cards to be touched. But anyways, that's a whole nother subject. I don't think Force of Will should ever be banned, but
Yeah, yeah.
Days, it can go. But but if the same thing about Commander, where you're literally every set you're getting a Commander product, every supplemental set, every secret layer, all these cards that are coming in, whether they're new, old, whatever, you're just basically just influxing, the format. There's got to be a more like hands-on approach. It can't just be like, it's community driven, it's this, that. No, the corporation now has control of that. So they need to take ownership of the format and understand that the format can't be the same now in the next 5 years. Like, we were already to a point to where like we're kind of like, man, Blue Farm's kind of been one of the best decks for a while now. Timna Thrasios was already the best deck for the longest time during the Hulk days and stuff.
Mm.
And now we're back to where it's basically one of the best, if not the best deck now again. That's sad that those two decks have basically had a stranglehold on cEDH for how many years?
Yeah, basically since 2016, the face of the format has been a Timna deck. And then I would argue there might have been a 3 month period where it was like, well, might have been Najila for a little bit, Rogsai for a little bit, but like the overall, it's just been like Timna Thras or Timna Grom, like for the
And I
vast
get like,
stretch.
and I'm kind of including like Thrasvile, because Thrasvile was really popular at one point, and those type of decks. So basically, like these 4-color plus style decks
Yeah.
that were basically the thing to do. And yes, I know there's other decks that randomly fit in there. We understand that there was the green white Sisay deck with Paradox Engine and stuff like that, which that deck's pretty sweet, not gonna lie. But I'm trying to look at this from a macro perspective. So if basically those partners have basically had this stranglehold on the format because ultimately they limit deck design. They just do.
Mm.
Because then now you always have to ask your question, well, does my commander does it do anything unique that those decks don't already do?
Yeah.
Like, oh, my commander draws cards. Well, that's cool, but is it better than like an infinite outlet than Thrasios and Seaborn Muse? Probably not.
And you're also weighing
You
that
know,
against whether it's worth building a deck around a commander. When like there's a cost to enabling a commander. Like they have to be there are some that are like generically good enough. Like you could argue like, okay, Tivit is like, is this worth better? Is this better than Timna and Thrasius, what they offer? Depending on what I'm trying to do, yeah, it could be. But the
right? And it
bar
has
at
different
something has to
synergies.
clear. And especially as the more synergy focused it gets, the higher that bar like really needs to be of like, okay, well, the cost of this is like I'm adding 10 cards to my deck. So whatever, the bottom 10% of cards or whatever that the best decks would run, I don't get to run because I have to devote 10 slots to this. And I just start with one less card in my opening hand because I don't have a partner. Like, yeah,
Yeah. I
probably maybe
also
worth
think
going.
it
Might be worth going.
I will say if we do want to, I don't know, maybe like a card I'd like to see is like Commander Ritual, basically like a dark ritual for Commander mana, right? Like it's like I don't know how you would make it, but like decks can play something like that. I'm sure there's some broken mechanic there. I'm not even thinking of, but what I would like to see is more like if you're going to run stuff like if you're going to have like the Fierce Guardianship, Deflecting SWAT, those kind of
Mm.
cards, why not make a card that's like if your commander is 5 mana or more, it's free to cast? Those type of things that kind of reward you for playing these bigger commanders.
Mm.
Because again, it can't just be about it's not about CDH, it's about commander as a whole.
Yeah, we've really only they've dipped a little bit in it, like with what stinging study I think is a card like that. You like draw cards equal to your commander's mana value.
Yeah, and it's an instant, right? Is it an instant? I
I
believe so.
I can't remember. I know it's like I think it's 4 and a black. It might be an instant. I can't remember. It's either instant or
Yeah,
sorcery.
probably pretty good with something like a Dargo, right?
Yeah, I mean draw 7.
What's the there's like a commander I saw. It's like got like it's like 12. It's like I think 12 or 14 total mana, but it costs less for like something you have.
Oh, I know there's that dragon one the Is It dragon one they printed recently. I think it was 8 mana and then Is It
Okay.
colors, and it was like it's like for each instant and sorcery in your graveyard. I think it costs one less,
Yeah.
something like that. But I don't know.
Yeah.
There's a few things like that.
But ultimately, like that card's 5 mana, right? Like, so I'm just saying, like, what is it called? Bolt Bin, right? Like,
Yeah,
it's a 4 mana. Yeah, like I think
like a
stuff like
ferocious
that.
effect.
Yeah, yeah, I think because if you're gonna have like a 5 mana commander, it's probably gonna have power 4 or greater, more than likely, not always, but
Mm.
I think more design space like that to get more creative because we're getting what our next set is Innistrad remasters. Boo, don't care.
Finally, reprinting cards that were power crept out like 4 years ago.
It's like sweet. Get retro Lilianas for standard.
Yeah, it's insane.
I think one of the cards that I've seen most people excited about is Young Wolf getting new
Yeah,
artwork and or retro artwork.
so
Because
bad.
I was trying to look at like my decks and stuff, and like, is there a card from this set that's gonna have like a retro frame that like I play? And I'm like, I don't have anything in here.
Yeah,
So,
that's the only thing I saw I
um,
cared about. Like, just like that's a cool looking Snapcaster Mage. That's about it.
I guess retro Meat Hook Massacre is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Um, but then we get into the Aether Drift set.
Mm.
That's the next actual like new set, and that set's gonna be pushed. I mean, it's a standard set. They got to push the envelope. It's gonna have powerful cards. It's probably gonna have cards that are gonna clearly make their way into CDH.
Gonna
I'm
have
pretty
a
sure that
Planeswalker equipment. They
yeah,
show
I'm pretty
that.
sure that green. I'm pretty sure that green white Gear Hulk's already playable in like the decks that would
Mhm.
want it because it tutors for 2 creatures for 4
Yeah, it looks
mana.
pretty cool.
Yeah, it looks pretty cool. Looks pretty neat. I like it. But I'm just curious what CDH is going to look like moving forward, especially with like the universes beyond standard.
Mhm.
Um,
Which is gonna be interesting
and
because they basically said when they made that announcement that making product for other formats has been kind of a failure and it's hard for them to get it right. Like with like obviously Modern Horizons, especially 3, has just been kind of a catastrophic failure and just ruined every format or
In
just
card design, but like in sales.
oh yeah, that's the thing. They've been I think they want to strike that balance of like, well, we want to be able to make these sets without having to just clean up our own messes constantly. So like I think they're still going to be doing them, but they can't keep up with all universes beyond stuff goes to other formats because we said
Yeah.
we wouldn't put it in standard when they want to make a ton of universes beyond stuff. I think that was the main thing. Like if we make 3 Modern Horizon sets a year, we're going to ruin every format easily.
Yeah, we're basically going to get to that point of Yu-Gi-Oh! Like where it's just everything's completely busted and power crept out. And, I've
Mhm.
watched that
We're gonna be pendulum
literally.
summoning our goblin lackeys.
Nope. Um, but yeah, that's something I will say. Modern Horizons is my favorite set of the year. It just always is because it's the only set that I legitimately think is worth buying pack wise
Mm.
because you have so many hits. Like for the longest time, you could buy MH2 for a set booster box for like $189. And you're like, oh, darn. At the time, all these cards were legal. You're like, oh, I hit grief, endurance, solitude, subtlety, fury, Urza Saga, fetch lands, Ragavan, and then you just have like really good role players like Ignoble Hierarch, DRC, Esper Sentinel. That card was still like a $20 card.
Mhm.
That was, and plus you hit the retro cards from the prior set. So you're like, man, this set has a ton of great hits. Now that set, you're just like, oh, it's just got banned cards in it.
Or stuff that's like Ragavan's like $20 now.
Yeah. They need to unban that card for legacy. Let the man free.
Sure.
Let
Yeah,
him
yeah, yeah.
free. Oh, but then we automatically see Ragavan plus days. See, is it Ragavan or is it days? That's the problem. But
No. It's Psychic Frog. It's fine. But yeah, this has been such a random. I think I'm gonna
I'm
end
sure
up
a lot of
putting.
this is gonna get cut.
I think I'm
But
gonna put an unedited version on Patreon and
yeah, I
then
think that'd be pretty
trim it
cool.
out. I think I'll start doing that. But yeah, ultimately, it's kind of tough to know where we're going and what even I'm doing in my how I want to engage with it because that's kind of the biggest thing for me and people watching this too is if you see a bunch of problems with your format or whatever you do, whatever spending your time on, and it's not for you anymore, you kind of got to decide like, well, is this what I want to do with my time if it doesn't get fixed? Because I think my real thoughts are if the next BNR for Commander, whenever that is, I don't think that's next week when the Legacy stuff drops. I don't think they're going to do Commander at that time, but I don't know, maybe. If the next update makes the format worse, I'm probably dipping. Genuinely. Like, I think if it gets worse, and maybe not even I dip, but just like, I don't think there will be many people who care if it gets worse in the next update, like whatever that means. Like they ban another iconic card, they unban something that just makes everything miserable. I don't think they would do that, but whatever the next update is. It's hard to think if it gets worse than it is, or they print something that's miserable and they refuse to ban anything. Then I'm likely to want to stick around and do it if the format's not really going to be curated well. So let us know down below if that's how you feel. If you're enjoying the current metagame, I do think especially if you play very casually and your games are just like, hey, we still play the kind of more fringy stuff we played and the game's a little bit slower and it's like more our pace. We didn't like when Dockside swung the game. Probably is more enjoyable for like the like casual competitive kind of players who kind of like something sitting between cEDH and like old cEDH and casual gameplay, like high level casual. Probably is sort of ideal because I do think high level cEDH are, current cEDH is more at that pace of like high power used to be. And so it probably does appeal to some people. Doesn't really feel that much like cEDH to me. I kind of miss, when we were vintage light. Now we're kind of basically just legacy with Soul Ring. It's not quite there now. It honestly every
No,
time
because Jeweled Lotus and Dockside's legal in Legacy.
that's true. You can do Jeweled
And
Lotus with
Nadu.
your doubling cube or whatever. And Nadu for now. We'll see.
Hey, the
Um
tech is you board in your Docksides against the Mystic Forge decks, and
True.
that's it. You just play that. You're the Mystic Forge deck with red, and then they go off, and you're like, all right, cool, cast Dockside Extortionist. Then I proceed to go.
True. Just hope that they didn't have like a glaring flesh raker start, because then it doesn't really
Oh
work out that
man.
well. But Yeah, it feels cringe to be like, yeah, the best thing I can tutor for with this vamp tutor is soul ring. Like that just it just doesn't feel right. Whenever I have to do that, like I tutored for soul ring and Roxai, I was like, this isn't right. This doesn't feel good to me. I'm not here for it. I'm not digging it. But we'll see. We're gonna keep playing CDH for a bit. Um and doing the thing. Hopefully format improves. Maybe some things will get adjusted. We'll see what that looks like. But let us know down below what you're thinking. Um Check out this unedited version of this podcast, I guess, if there's two versions, because we really go off and talk about a whole bunch of random stuff. But
To be fair, Matt and I haven't really got a chance to talk in a while. So
true.
outside of like just some short messages back and forth. So this was kind of like a catching up kind of thing.
Yeah, and I do in general think I want the podcast to be more a space of not fully unstructured, just rambling, but like a little bit less structured because, like, teaching the basics of CH is something we can't continue to do. We'll do updates on, stats and strategies that are starting to look a little bit better, but like, you can expect to see in, I guess about 3 or 4 weeks from now, the quarterly report for the end of this year where we'll really dive into what did well and stuff like that. But outside of that, kind of just going to be talking what we're feeling about the format right now. Postband, not the biggest fans in the world, but we're not all doom and gloom. We're not dipping, but we are really interested to see how things shape up and if this supposed widening and opening up of the format ever ends up happening. Because so far, doesn't look to be the case. But thank you for watching. And as always, go play CDH. Have a good one, everybody.